Outside, a gravel path crunches with each footfall, a sound that seems large in the heavy stillness before the birds stir. You walk toward the cypress alley, the double row of dark spires that forms the central axis of the Villa d'Este, their silhouettes black against a sky where only the faintest grey glow outlines the Sabine hills to the east. The heat of the previous day still radiates from the stone balustrades lining the path, enough to make the air just above them waver faintly in the dim light. To your left, the fountain of the Bicchiere ornate murmurs its constant low note. It has played through the night and will keep playing, water slipping from the upper shell into the lower one with a sound like a distant sheep bell. You pause at the edge of the alley, looking down the long corridor of trees. The cypresses are exactly as you left them yesterday, their dark needles undisturbed, a few pale shoots just visible against the charcoal canopy. You move to the tool shed tucked behind the Bicchiere and travertine wall, its wooden door already ajar because you seldom lock it. Inside, the shears hang from an iron hook, their long ash wood handles smooth from years of palm and sweat. You lift them down, feeling the familiar weight settle in your hands, the cool iron of the blades still holding the overnight coolness despite the warm air. The pivot pin has a faint gleam of oil you applied the evening before. You carry the shears back to the alley and begin at the first cypress on the right, the one nearest the grand staircase. Working from the base upward, you open the handles wide enough to admit a new shoot, no thicker than a goose quill. Position the blades around its base and squeeze until the tough, aromatic wood parts with a soft creak. The clipped twig drops straight down onto the terracotta-colored gravel, landing amid others from the day before. You release the handles, hear the spring-loaded catch reset, then open them again for the next shoot. The pruning is a slow scanning process. Your gaze climbs the dense column of scale-like leaves, searching for any silhouette that breaks the tree's intended flame shape. Every few inches you find a fine lateral sprout pushing outward, or a branch tip that has thickened into a small fan, and you remove it with the same unhurried cut. The deep green needles release their sharp resinous scent as they are severed, a smell that hangs in the air around you and mixes with the dry dust of the gravel. You step back after finishing 1 vertical meter to check the line against the lightning sky, then move in again, finding another spray of needles that wants to spread sideways instead of tapering upward. The shears open and close, the metal parts sliding against each other with a whisper that becomes as steady as breath. Moving to the second cypress, you repeat the same sequence, a slow walk around the base to see all sides, then the steady lift of the shears, the cut, the falling twig. The eastern sky has now graduated from faint grey to palest lemon, and the stars that were visible just minutes ago have dissolved completely. A single bird a blackcap hidden somewhere in the boxwood hedging tries, 3 tentative notes and quietens. You work without counting trees or measuring time. Your body knows the alley so well that you shift from one trunk to the next without conscious thought, the distance between them, exactly 7 of your own paces. At the 5th cypress, you notice a small dead twig inside the green cloak, its needles brown and curled, and you reach in with the shear's narrow tip to snip it at the joint, hearing the dry, papery snap echo very softly inside the dense foliage. The light strengthens by slow degrees, and now you can make out the individual fronds of the cypress, each one a tight braid of tiny green scales overlapping like the mail of a Roman soldier. The villa's loggias on the upper terrace begin to detach from the night, their arches going from formless grey to warm stone. The gravel underfoot shifts from charcoal to its true terracotta color, and the shears cast a thin shadow now on the ground. You pause for a moment, straightening your back and resting the shears vertically against your thigh, the handle's end pressed into the gravel. Far off across the garden, the 100 fountains send their parallel jets into the long stone trough, a sound like a steady rush of grain pouring from a sack. No water reaches the organ yet. Its cistern above is still filling, the sluice gate set to let the flow in only after sunrise. You have heard the organ's madrigal countless times, but at this hour there is only the water in its many ordinary voices. A very first cicada, hidden on the sun, warm side of a cypress trunk, experiments with a tentative rattle before stopping abruptly, as if surprised by its own noise. The sky shifts through lemon into apricot, and the air begins to carry the first true heat of the new day. Your linen tunic feels heavier against your shoulders, and a thin film of sweat forms at your temples. You resume pruning with the same pace, opening the handles, guiding the blades around a slender shoot on the 8th cypress, closing them, letting the twig fall. Some of the clipped sprigs land upright on the gravel, their cut ends pale green and glistening with sap. Others cartwheel sideways and lie flat. The shear's wooden handles have now absorbed the warmth of your hands, the surface utterly smooth under your thumbs. By the time you reach the 11th tree, the sun has cleared the far ridge of Monte Cartillo and strikes the upper reaches of the cypress alley at a low angle, painting the east-facing side of each spire in a brilliant yellow-green, while the opposite side remains in deep shadow. The two-tone effect sharpens the tree's outline against the apricot sky and shows you every small imperfection you have yet to address. You find a cluster of 3 wayward shoots on the sunny side of the 12th cypress, all sprouted from a single fork and resembling a tiny green hand. You remove them in quick succession, catching the last clipping in your palm before it touches the ground, and tossing it into the heap you will later collect. The rhythm continues. Scan, select, cut, step, scan again. You move from tree to tree, the central alley now half transformed from a dark corridor into a colonnade of silver and alive columns. The cicada tries its rattle a second time, and this time it does not stop, its dry buzz sustaining for several seconds before trailing off and triggering another cicada somewhere up the hill. The sound intertwines with the gentle, omnipresent splash of the fountains, creating a textured silence that seems deeper than the quiet before dawn. You notice a piece of gravel has lodged in the fork of a low branch. You pick it out with your thumbnail and drop it to the ground, then continue clipping the tiny needles that line the lower trunk, ones that seem to emerge overnight simply to blur the clean line between earth and tree. At the 15th cypress, the last before a broad opening that gives way to the oval fountain, you pause again and look back along the alley toward the villa. The loggias now glow a soft amber, their columns casting long, faint shadows across the pavement, and the windows of the upper floor reflect the morning sky with a milky blankness. Nothing moves except the thin haze rising from the gravel as it warms. Your shears hang loosely at your side, the blades slightly open, while you simply stand for a minute or two, breathing the air that smells of cypress resin, warmed stone, and the clean, mineral breath of the fountains. This pause is part of the work, you know. The trees tell you nothing in haste. When you turn back to the 15th cypress, you notice a single needle has begun to yellow at its tip, and you trim that entire branchlet back to the next healthy joint, the shears closing with a crisp, satisfying finality. The light moves across the garden, now reaching the lower terraces where the younger cypresses stand around the fish ponds, their trunks still slender. You will descend later, but for now you stay with the tall alley, the original cypresses planted generations ago, their roots deep in the clay and travertine. You see that the 16th tree has pushed a new leader upward, a pale green spire no longer than your thumb. You leave it entirely untouched because the tree's central point must always be free to rise. Instead, you focus on its sides, taking off a sparse scattering of lateral shoots that have grown only in the last few days, each one a lighter shade of green than the established foliage. The shears move through the air with a steady, almost drowsy cadence, guided by years of habit. The sun has fully detached from the mountain now and is climbing into a cloudless sky of pale blue. The gravel reflects the light in a million-minute sparkles from the quartz grains mixed in the terracotta, and your shadow has become a clear, dark shape walking beside you across the path. You finish the pruning of the right-hand row, a total of 18 trees, and begin on the left-hand side, starting back at the villa end. The work is no different. You adjust only the angle of your approach so that the morning sun is behind you now, illuminating the tree you face without glare. You find the same subtle growths, the same crisp cuts, the same fresh scent of resin each time the iron jaws compress. A greenfinch calls from the umbrella pine near the entrance, a long, wheezing note that repeats every few seconds, and a small gecko flicks across the stone balustrade and vanishes into a crack. By the time you are halfway along the left-hand row, the initial sharpness of the dawn cool is entirely gone, replaced by a dry, enveloping warmth that you feel on the back of your neck and the tops of your ears. You wipe your forehead with the sleeve of your tunic, the linen coming away damp, and continue. The shears now feel like an extension of your own hand, the weight and balance so familiar that you no longer perceive them as a tool, but merely as the means by which the cypresses keep their shape. You find a small spider web stretched between two twigs, the spider a mere speck of brown suspended at its center. You clip the twigs on either side of the web so that the web drifts down and catches on a lower branch, where the spider will rebuild tonight. Even that is part of the garden's order. The cicadas have gradually built their chorus to a steady pulsing drone, a sound that layers over the splash and murmur of water from every direction. The water organ remains silent still, but you know the cistern is nearly full. Soon the sluice will be adjusted and the melody will begin to play, but that is still some minutes away. For now there is only the deep absorptive quiet of the morning, the cypress alley stretching in perfect straight lines toward the far balustrade, and the slow, steady work of your hands. You reach the 24th cypress, the last one on the lower end of the left row, and give it the same careful inspection as the first. You find only 6 shoots to remove, all of them on the lower third, and you clip them one after another before stepping back to confirm the profile. Satisfied, you lower the shears and turn toward the villa once more, your morning's primary task complete, the trees neat and sharp as green flames. The sun now brightens the entire garden with a clean white light, and the Villa d'Este's loggias, arches and staircases are all fully emerged from the night, their travertine surface glowing warmly. You decide to pause for a drink before moving to check the water organ mechanism. You rest the shears against the nearest tree and walk the few paces to the lion mask drinking fountain set into the retaining wall near the Rotonda dei Cipressi. Water pours from the carved bronze mouth into a small basin of pale stone, a gentle stream that never varies. You cup your hands and collect the cool, sweet water, rinsing your mouth and splashing your face before drinking fully. The taste is faintly of the mountain limestone through which the Aniene River passes, a mineral freshness that clears the dust of the alley from your throat. You stand a moment longer, looking out over the lower gardens where the first dragonflies of the day are hovering above the fish ponds, their wings catching the sun in metallic blues and greens. The Villa d'Este rests in its long, hot summer morning, perfectly still, yet alive with the sound of water and the endless, slow growth of the cypresses. The sun, now clear of the Sabine hills, pours a clean white light across the entire length of the central cypress alley. The sharp dividing line between shadow and brilliance that you observed earlier has vanished, and every eastern face of every tree glows a uniform, radiant olive green, while the western sides remain in a softer, shadowed tone. The heat has not yet become oppressive, but it gathers steadily in the gravel, in the stone balustrades, in the air itself, so that you feel a gentle pressure of the temples and a steady warmth in the crown of your head. You return to the alley with the long-handled shears after your drink, the tool's ashwood handles now carrying the residual warmth of your hands from the earlier work, the iron blades dry and clean. The garden around you is fully awake, the cicadas have found their full voice and produce an unbroken, dry rattle from the pines and cypresses, while the fountains continue their endless, layered rush, a sound so constant it becomes not a sound at all, but the texture of the morning itself. You begin at the first tree on the right-hand side once more, not because you missed anything during the dawn round, but because a second pass is part of the daily rhythm. The cypress, like all living things in this intense summer, extends itself minutely even in the span of a few hours, a fine shoot here, a tiny spray of needles there, invisible to a hurried eye but plain to yours. You walk a slow, complete circle around the trunk, your shears held lightly in readiness, your gaze traveling from the base up to the narrow, dark green point. The lowest branches sweep almost to the gravel, and you kneel carefully, propping one knee on a flat stone you keep near the tree for this purpose, to inspect the underside of the foliage. You find a single soft twig, no thicker than a sparrow's leg, curving downward into the negative space beneath the canopy. You reach the shears in, position the blades at a shallow angle, and close them. The twig separates with a tiny green snap and tumbles into the gravel. You rise, dusting off your knee with a habitual swipe of the palm, and continue upward. The middle portion of this first cypress is dense and well-behaved. the result of many seasons of consistent attention. But even here, small imperfections have appeared since storm. A cluster of 3 lateral shoots on the south-facing side has pushed outward perhaps half a finger's width beyond the ideal taper. You open the shears just wide enough to admit all 3 at once, adjusting your stance to bring the blades into line with the angle of the branch. The cut is swift and clean. The shoots fall in a small tangled bundle, and you catch them in your free hand, then drop them onto the growing pile at the tree's base that you will later gather. The fresh, resinous scent intensifies with each cut, hanging around you in a nearly visible cloud, and you inhale it slowly, the sharp, clean fragrance that belongs uniquely to this garden and this season. At eye level, you encounter a dead internal branchlet, its needles brown and dry, hidden a few inches inside the green exterior. You reach in with the tip of the shears, careful not to disturb the surrounding healthy foliage, and snip at the joint where the brown meets the living wood. The dry twig makes a hollow, papery sound as it breaks free, and a tiny puff of dust, the remains of last winter's growth, drifts onto your sleeve. You blow it away with a quiet breath and move on. The rhythm is the same. A slow spiral of inspection around each tree. A pause to step back and check the silhouette against the sky. A short return to clip a final wandering shoot, then a few paces along the gravel to the next trunk. The 7-pace spacing between the cypresses passes almost unnoticed, your feet knowing the distance so well that you stop automatically at the correct spot. The second cypress has thrust a fresh leader upward, a pale green spire that rises 3 inches above the older, darker foliage, and you leave it untouched as always. But just beneath it, on the western side, you locate a lateral branch that has grown too thickly, its mass beginning to create a small bulge in the otherwise smooth taper. This requires a larger cut than the fine shoots, so you adjust your grip on the shears, moving your hands closer to the blades for better control. You squeeze the handles slowly, letting the iron bite through the fibrous wood in stages rather than in a single snap, because a clean cut here is important to prevent the bough from splitting inward. The wood yields with a series of soft, creaking protests before the thick branchlet drops heavily to the gravel. You examine the cut surface, a pale green oval of healthy wood ringed with darker bark, and are satisfied with its neatness. Then you step back, squinting up at the tree's profile against the now brilliant sky, and see that the line is restored to its intended taper. You continue down the row, the morning heat pressing more firmly against your back, and you feel the linen of your tunic begin to cling between your shoulder blades. The sweat on your brow is now a constant, thin film, and you wipe it with the back of your forearm every few minutes in a motion that has become as automatic as the pruning itself. The shears open and close in a steady, unhurried beat, the pivoting metal parts moving with a faint, oiled hush that underlies the louder garden sounds. At the third tree you find a small papery wasp nest anchored to a low inner twig. You recognize the abandoned cells, the colony long since gone, and you trim the entire twig away to keep the inner spaces clear. The brittle paper crumbles as it falls, dissolving into fragments that catch the light for a moment before settling on the gravel. At the fourth cypress you notice that the ground around the base has become dusted with a fine pale powder, the remains of the needles you clipped at dawn and did not yet sweep. You make a mental note to bring the broom after this second pass, but for now you step carefully around the powder and focus on the tree itself. The sun has moved higher, and the shadows cast by the cypresses have shrunk into small dark pools directly beneath each trunk, so compact that the gravel directly under the canopy stays surprisingly cool to the touch. You kneel again, running your free hand over the ground to feel for any stray moisture from the night's dew, but the gravel is completely dry, the earth beneath it parched and holding fast. You prune away a few straggling shoots near the base, their needles pale and soft from shade, starvation, and then rise, shaking the gravel dust from your palm. The soundscape of the garden shifts subtly as the morning advances. The cicadas have reached a plateau of steady, metallic buzzing that no longer rises or falls, but simply persists, a wall of sound that paradoxically becomes a kind of silence. The fountains, too, have their own steady note, but now you hear a new element. From high on the upper terrace, the water organ cistern has finally filled, and the mechanism has begun to play its first madrigal of the day. The bass pipe sounds first a low, round breath that travels down the staircases and across the alley like a warm wind through a hollow tube. It is joined after a few seconds by the through pipes, their tones brighter but still soft, blending into a phrase of 7 notes that repeats and then resets with a near-silent click of the rotating brass cylinder. This music, if it can be called that, is so familiar to you that you no more listen to it than you listen to your own breathing. It is simply present, another thread in the garden's fabric. You reach the 8th cypress, the one you were attending when the sun first struck the upper branches earlier, and you see that your work has held. No new shoots have appeared in the intervening hour, the trimmed cuts still pale and clean. You give the tree a brief, appreciative glance anyway, running your eyes down its entire height out of habit, and then move on. The next trunk, however, has produced a spray of 6 fine needles on a lower branch, all emerging from a single node like a tiny green fountain in miniature. You bend close, the scent of the needles sharp in your nostrils, and cut them carefully one by one, gathering the slender green pins in your cupped palm. When all 6 are removed, you let them scatter onto the gravel, where they lie like a handful of green sewing needles. By the time you pass the midpoint of the alley, the heat has become a palpable weight, and the air shimmers above the gravel in transparent dancing waves that make the distant end of the path seem to vibrate. You pause in the shade of the 11th cypress, leaning the shears against your thigh, and simply standing for a full minute. The shade offers no real coolness, only an absence of direct sun, but the respite is enough. You listen to the organ's madrigal repeat its cycle bass, flute, and count the notes, without willing to, your mind drifting into a quiet lull. A pair of small brown sparrows bounces across the gravel ahead, pecking at invisible seeds, and they take no notice of you until you shift your weight, at which point they flutter up into the branches with a soft chitter. You resume at the 12th cypress, the one with the forked branch you pruned at dawn, and you see that the cut ends have already begun to seal themselves with a thin translucent resin, tiny golden beads that catch the sun. You touch one with the very tip of your finger, feeling the sticky, warm sap that smells strongly of pine and something faintly citrus. Then you wipe your finger on your tunic and continue around the tree, finding only 2 tiny shoots to remove. The shears open and close, the rhythm now so deeply ingrained that your mind is free to wander across the garden's many details, the way the light strikes the water of the fish ponds and sends a bright, trembling reflection onto the underside of the loggia roof, the distant figure of a kitchen boy crossing the upper terrace with a basket of herbs, the constant, unchanging smile of the marble satyr masks that line the 100 fountains. The 15th cypress, the last before the open space at the oval fountain, greets you with its familiar, slightly asymmetrical profile. This tree has always had a gentle lean to the west, a characteristic so old that no amount of pruning can alter it. Nor would you wish to. You accept the lean and work with it, trimming only to maintain the tree's health and the general silhouette. Today you find a dead branchlet high up, its brown needles stark against the living green, and you stretch to reach it, the shears fully extended, your shoulder pressing into the outer needles. The branchlet snaps free and tumbles down through the interior, catching briefly on a lower twig before falling to the gravel. You pick it up, feeling its brittle, lifeless texture, and add it to the pile. Then you walk the few paces to the opening and look out over the lower garden spread before you like a map. The fish ponds glinting, the oval fountain's wide cascade running glassy and smooth, the narrow dark threads of the cypress paths on the lower terraces, and beyond them the pale olive groves on the hillside. You stand there for a little while, letting the small breeze that now stirs across the slope find you. This breeze is faint, barely enough to move the thinnest cypress leaves, but it carries the smells of the wider countryside, warm earth, wild fennel, and the distant mineral scent of the Insomnia river. The organ plays its madrigal once more, and this time you notice a slight variation, an extra breath in the bass pipe, evidence that the water flow has fluctuated by a tiny amount. You file this observation away for later when you will check the mechanism, but for now you turn back to the allée, crossing the gravel to the left-hand row to continue your second pass. The left-hand row, which you worked also at dawn, now also shows the tiny day's growth you expect. The first tree, nearest the opening, has pushed out a fresh spray on its eastern side, the same pale green you have been removing all morning. You open the shears, close them, and the spraying drops. Another small wasp nest, this one no bigger than a thumbprint and still clinging to a high twig, meets the same fate as the first. The papery material crumbles silently, and the fragments disappear into the dense interior. You find a speck of bird dropping, dry and white, on a middle branch and flick it away with the tip of the shears, not wanting to smear it across the needles. The work is minute, repetitive, yet also gentle, requiring only the smallest adjustments to maintain perfection. Moving up the left-hand row, you pass under the shade of the loggia for a few paces, and the sudden cool of the covered space is a relief. You hear your footsteps change from the crunch of gravel to the soft scuff of stone flags, then back to gravel as you emerge. The 17th cypress, a particularly old specimen with a trunk as thick as your waist, needs very little pruning. Its growth has slowed with age, and it produces only a sparse few shoots each summer. You still give it the full inspection out of respect for its years, and you find nothing to remove except a single needle that has yellowed and curled. You pluck it with your fingers rather than the shears, feeling the dry, rough texture before dropping it. The sun is now high enough that your shadow has become a compact, dark shape directly beneath you, and the heat on the top of your head is intense. You decide to pause for another drink before finishing the last 6 trees, so you walk back to the lion mask fountain, the same one you used after dawn, and again cup the cool water in your hands. The water is still as cool, still as sweet, and you drink slowly, feeling the chill travel down your throat and spread through your chest. You splash a little on your neck and the back of your ears, and the water evaporates almost instantly in the dry heat, leaving behind a fleeting coolness that is more memory than sensation. Refreshed, you return to the left-hand row and complete the remaining trees with the same careful, unhurried pace. The 23rd cypress yields 3 shoots, the 24th only 1. The final tree, near the grand staircase where you began the day, stands perfectly, its taper uninterrupted, its dark green needles immaculate. You walk around it twice to be certain, the shears resting idle across your shoulder, and find nothing to cut. Satisfied, you lower the shears to your side and walk back along the alley, this time simply observing, not pruning. The cypresses stand in their orderly rows, each one a tall, narrow flame of green, their clipped surfaces precise and even. The gravel beneath them is dotted with small heaps of clippings, evidence of the morning's work, but the overall impression is one of deep, cultivated peace. You carry the shears to the shade near the loggia and lean them against the wall, the iron blades glinting briefly in the sun before settling into the shadow. The organ on the upper terrace continues its madrigal, the bass and flutes blending with the constant rush of the fountains and the drone of the cicadas. The morning is now fully unfolded, the heat has settled golden weight over the Villa d'Este, and your pruning of the central alley is complete for now, though you will return later in the afternoon to repeat the cycle. For the moment, you simply stand in the shade, breathing the resin-scented air, listening to the garden's vast, calm voice, and letting the seconds pass without measure. The next task will be to climb to the water organ and check its mechanism, but that can wait a little longer. The sun now clears the rooftop of the villa and strikes the great fountain of the organ with full morning brilliance, turning the marble facade and its carved nymphs and satyrs into a field of hot white light. You leave the shears leaning in the shade beneath the loggia, their iron blades still warm from the work along the cypress alley, and cross the dry gravel toward the stone staircase that climbs to the organ terrace. Your footsteps fall in the same slow rhythm as the pruning, unhurried, your body moving in a state of quiet ease. The staircase is narrow and worn smooth by generations of gardeners and servants. Its pale travertine steps scoop slightly in the center, and you climb them with a hand brushing the retaining wall to your left, where a thin trickle of seepage has darkened the stone in a permanent grey stripe. As you rise, the garden unfolds beneath you in stages, the central alley you just tended with its tall green flames, the sheen of the fish ponds, the dense dark umbrella pines clustered near the boundary wall, and far off the pale thread of the ancient road leading toward Tivoli. You reach the upper terrace and pause to let your breathing steady, because the climb, though short, always presses a little warmth into the chest on a day this hot. The organ fountain stands before you in its elaborate carved niche, water spilling from multiple basins and cascading over marble shells into a wide pool. The sound a continuous liquid chime that overlies the deeper rushing from below. The facade itself is a small architectural stage, columns rising around a central arch, behind which the organ's pipes are just visible, their silver-grey surfaces catching the light in slender vertical lines. You do not linger in front of the fountain, however. Your task lies at the rear. You walk around the side of the nymphaeum, ducking under the low branches of an ilex tree that offers a brief moment of shade, and approach the small wooden door set into the back wall, a door no taller than your shoulder and banded with simple iron straps. The door's iron latch is warm but not hot, and you lift it with a single finger, pushing the door inward on hinges that move silently, thanks to the tallow you rubbed into them last spring. You bend low, ducking your head beneath the lintel, and step into the cool darkness behind the facade. Instantly, the full heat of the Roman summer is replaced by a still, cave-like freshness, the air several degrees cooler and carrying the mineral scent of damp stone and a faint tang of green copper. The transition is so sharp that the skin of your forearms prickles slightly, and you pause just inside the doorway for your eyes to adjust from the brilliance to the gloom. The only light enters through the gaps in the fountain's front carvings and a small round window high in the back wall, its opening no wider than the dinner plate, through which a dusty shaft of sun falls diagonally onto the copper tank. The copper tank dominates the small chamber, a great rectangular vessel riveted at its seams, standing on stout wooden trestles. Its metal surface is patinated to a dark brown-green, streaked here and there with pale verdigris where water has dripped and dried over the years. The tank is fed by a lead pipe that enters through the wall on your right, a pipe that carries water from a secondary branch of the Anaean aqueduct, diverted specifically for the organ and kept separate from the other fountains so that its pressure and flow remain constant. You step closer, the packed earth floor soft under your shoes, and listen to the faint gurgle of water entering the tank through a submerged inlet. The surface of the water is slick and dark, reflecting the round window in a small quivering disc, and when you lean over the edge you see that the level is just above the halfway mark, exactly as it should be for the mechanism to operate correctly throughout the day. A brass float, shaped like a small pear, bobs gently near the far wall, attached by a thin chain to an indicator that tells you at a glance the water's height. You run your hand along the main feed pipe where it emerges from the wall, tracing its cool, damp surface from the stone to the tank's inlet. The pipe is roughly 2 inches across and encrusted with a fine, gritty deposit of lime, but you are feeling for any soft obstruction, any leaf or clump of moss that might have been carried down from the hillside intake. Your fingers detect nothing but smooth, hard mineral, and you move your attention to the outflow pipe that leads from the tank's lower side toward the water wheel. This pipe is narrower, no wider than your thumb, and its mouth inside the tank is protected by a small bronze grating, a filter of fine holes meant to catch any gravel that might enter the system. You squat down, your knees pressing into the cool earth, and peer at the grating through the water's dark surface, tracing each hole with your gaze to confirm that none are blocked. The bronze is a little green with patina, but all the openings are clear, and the water flows through them with a silent, invisible current. Satisfied with the supply side, you straighten up and turn to the organ mechanism itself, which occupies the forward half of the narrow chamber. The brass cylinder sits horizontally above the keyboard, supported at each end by iron brackets bolted to the stone wall. The cylinder is about as long as your arm and as thick as a mature cypress trunk, a heavy, solid piece of metal that must have been cast in a single pour in some Roman foundry long ago. Its surface is not smooth, but densely populated with hundreds of tiny iron cogs and brass shims, each one pinned precisely into a hole drilled into the cylinder's skin. The cogs are of varying heights, some short and squat no bigger than a lentil, others tall and thin, rising nearly a full inch, and their arrangement is the encoded memory of the madrigal that the organ will play, a physical score written in metal that never changes. When the cylinder rotates, each cog in its turn meets a corresponding wooden tracker fitted with a small iron button, pushing it upward or letting it fall, and this movement opens a pallet inside the wind chest, releasing a puff of compressed air into one or more of the lead pipes that stand in the facade. You step to the left-hand bracket and examine the axle where it passes through the iron housing. This is the point of greatest friction, and it requires daily attention in the dry summer heat. You lift a small earthenware jar of olive oil from a ledge cut into the wall, Uncork it and pour a small pool of the pale golden liquid into a square of clean linen cloth kept folded beside it. The oil has the same gentle, fruity smell as the kitchen, a scent that mingles oddly with the mineral dampness. You dab the cloth against the axle, smearing the oil into the junction of brass and iron, and then you take hold of the cylinder's wooden hand-turn peg, a stout oak handle fixed to the axle's outer end, and begin to rotate the cylinder very slowly by hand. The movement is smooth at first, the oiled axle turning with a hushed, liquid silence, but you pay close attention to the resistance under your palm, feeling for any grain of rust, any tiny grit that might be working its way into the bearing. As the cylinder turns, the pinned cogwheels parade under your gaze, each one lifting its tracker with a soft wooden click that echoes faintly in the small chamber. You continue turning, your hand making its slow circuit, while your other hand rests lightly on the iron bracket to feel for any vibration that should not be there. The cylinder completes a full rotation without any catch or hesitation, and you let it come to rest with the starting position aligned once more. The oil has spread into a thin, unbroken film around the axle, and you wipe away a small excess that has beaded at the lower edge of the bracket. The scent of olive oil now dominates the close air, warm and comforting. Next, you bring your attention to the individual cogue pins. Though they are sturdy and rarely shift, the extreme temperature changes of the Roman summer can sometimes work a pin loose from its hole, and a loose pin will fail to lift its tracker fully, resulting in a weak or missing note. You run the tip of your index finger along a row of cogs, feeling each one rocking very slightly under pressure. They are all firm. You check a second row, a third, moving from left to right across the cylinder's belly while it remains motionless. One brass shim, a flat, rectangular piece near the center of the cylinder that corresponds to the brightest of the organ's flue pipes, yields ever so slightly when you press it sideways with your thumbnail. You open the small leather pouch tied to your belt, extract a thin brass hammer no longer than a finger, and tap the shim gently back into its seat until it stands rigid and flush with its neighbors. The tap makes a small bright note that rings inside the chamber for a fraction of a second and then dies into the sound of trickling water. You walk now to the windchest, the large wooden box that sits directly beneath the lead pipes and holds the air that the water wheel compresses. Its lid is pierced with rows of small rectangular holes, the pallet openings, each one covered by a thin leather flap that you can lift with a fingertip. You inspect a few of these flaps, looking for any that have warped or stiffened. They are all pliable and lie flat. The air inside the windchest has a faint pressure even now, a residual breath left from the morning's playing, and when you lift one pallet experimentally, a tiny sigh escapes, carrying a note of musty wood and the mineral tang of the water that drives the bellows. Beside the windchest, the wooden trackers descend from the cylinder's pins down to the pallets in a neat, closely spaced grid. Each tracker is a slim dowel of aged oak, darkened by time and polished by friction where it passes through its guide hole. You run your hand along the grid, feeling that none are binding, and you nudge one that seems slightly out of true, aligning it with a quiet push of your thumb until it slides freely in its guide. The whole mechanism is a marvel of patient carpentry and metalsmithing, but you handle it without wonder, as a man handles his own door latch, because you have cared for it through countless days just like this one. You move to the facade side of the chamber, where the lead pipes stand in their shallow wooden rack, their open mouths facing forward toward the garden through the carved screen. The pipes are of varying lengths and diameters, some as tall as your body, others short as a flute, and their metal has the soft, dull luster of old pewter. On the flue mouth of the largest pipe, the one that speaks the low foundational note of the madrigal, a small dead moth is trapped, its papery wings pressed flat against the lid by dried moisture. You reach in with a soft horsehair brush fetched from a hook on the wall, and gently, very gently, you sweep the moth away, catching its brittle body in your cupped palm. The pipe's mouth is now clear, a perfect dark oval. You brush a few specks of dust from the adjacent pipes, moving the brush in slow arcs, and then you pick up a folded linen cloth to wipe the fingerprints that have accumulated on the nearest pipe from previous touches. Beneath the grease, the ancient marks of Luca Biaggi's own fingers remain imprinted in the lead, darker grey walls that you never disturb, working the cloth only around their borders. You step back now, surveying the chamber from the center. The copper tank glints dully in the shaft of sunlight. The cylinder sits immobile but ready. The pipes stand clean and silent. The only sound is the steady drip of water from a joint in the tank's upper rim. A single drop every 2 seconds that falls into a small terracotta dish you placed there years ago, and the distant, muffled splash of the fountains outside. The air is cool and still, and you feel a deep, calm satisfaction that is less an emotion than a quiet alignment of all things being in their proper place. Now you turn to the brass lever that controls the sluice gate feeding the water wheel. Before you began your inspection, you had pushed this lever across, diverting the flow away from the wheel so that you could work without the mechanism in motion. The lever is set into a slot in the stone wall near the door, a simple flat bar of brass with a wooden ball on its end, warm from the ambient heat of the chamber. You grasp it firmly, and with a smooth, unhurried push, you slide it back into its running position. Immediately, through the stone floor, you feel a very faint tremor, and then you hear the first water trickle into the wheel housing below your feet. A thin, bright splashing that grows steadily as the sluice opens fully and the flow resumes its intended volume. The wooden water wheel, hidden in its stone pit beneath the chamber, begins to turn with a low groaning of wet oak and iron, a sound so deep it seems to come from the earth itself. The axle connecting the wheel to the cylinder engages with a soft clunk, and the brass cylinder begins to rotate under its own power, its pinned surface coming to life. You watch as the first cog meets the first tracker, lifting it, and the large flue pipe just beyond the screen draws in a breath of compressed air. It speaks, a very low, almost inaudible hum, a sound felt as much in the chest as heard by the ear, a round, dark vibration that fills the chamber and spills outward through the facade. The note hangs for several seconds, steady and deep, before the tracker falls and the pallet closes, ending it. Then the next cog engages, lifting a different pallet, and a higher note sounds, soft and clear, beginning the first phrase of the familiar madrigal. The notes follow one another in their unchanging sequence, the brass cylinder turning with the slowness of a sun's shadow across a wall, the water wheel groaning quietly below, the tank gurgling as fresh water enters to replace what has flowed out. The entire chamber breathes with a gentle, mechanical life. You stand for a full minute in the dimness, listening, confirming that every note speaks clearly and in its proper order. The low hum of the bass pipe comes around again on the cylinder's next revolution, just as steady, and you know the check is complete. You gather the oil jar and its cloth, returning them to their ledge, then brush the dead moth from your palm into a small basket of refuse kept beside the door. With a last glance at the copper tank, its level now minutely lower, and at the slowly rotating cylinder, you duck once more under the low lintel and step out through the wooden door into the blinding glare of the terrace. The heat strikes you like an opened oven door, the light so intense that you must close your eyes for a moment and let the dazzle subside. When you open them, the garden is brilliant and sharp, the travertine flagstones of the terrace reflecting white sun, the ilex shadows black as ink, and behind you the organ continuing its soft madrigal through the carved facade, a melody that follows you as you begin the slow descent down the worn stone stairs. The cypresses wait below, dark green and still, and the afternoon's work lies ahead. But for now you move simply, one step then another, the sound of the bass pipe rumbling gently at your back as the Villa d'Este settles deeper into its long, hot morning. By mid-morning, the heat has settled into every surface of the garden, a steady, enveloping presence that draws a thin film of sweat to your forehead and along your forearms. The cypress shadows on the central alley have shrunk into small dark pools directly beneath each trunk, and the gravel radiates warmth upward through the soles of your shoes. You retrieve the long-handled shears from where they lean in the loggia shade, their ashwood handles now fully warm, and carry them balanced across your shoulder as you turn away from the upper terrace. The water organ continues its madrigal behind you, the bass note rumbling softly and the flue pipes offering their 7-note phrase before the mechanism resets with a near-silent click. The melody follows you briefly and then blends into the general murmur of the fountains as you descend. You leave the flat of the alley and take the sloping stone ramp that curves down toward the lower gardens, the same ramp you have walked thousands of times. The stones here are worn even smoother than those of the staircase, polished to a dull sheen by centuries of feet and by the thin trickle of water that always seeps from a crack near the retaining wall, keeping one edge perpetually damp and darkened. Your shears shift slightly on your shoulder with each step, the weight a familiar counterpoint. As you descend, the air changes. It becomes slightly heavier, carrying more moisture from the fish ponds below and the dense planting of boxwood and lavender that lines the lower paths. The cicada chorus, so intense up on the exposed allée, now sounds slightly muffled, filtered through the ilex canopy that overhangs the ramp, though its dry buzz never ceases. The lower gardens open before you as the ramp levels out, a different world from the formal grandeur above. Here the geometry softens. The paths curve gently around the three long fish ponds, the water in them green, brown, and still, reflecting the sky in a muted, shifting mirror. The younger cypresses that line these paths are only half the height of their towering cousins on the alley, their trunks slender enough that you could almost circle one with both hands. They were planted later, perhaps 30 years ago, to replace trees lost to a winter storm, and they have not yet attained the full dense darkness of mature cypresses. Their needles hold a slightly brighter, fresher green, and their growth is more vigorous in the summer heat. It is these trees that require your attention now, their pruning lighter but more frequent, because the young wood pushes out new shoots almost daily in the relentless sun. You stop at the first of the lower cypresses and lean the long shears against a stone bench, then unlace the smaller secateurs from your belt, a compact tool with short iron blades and handles wrapped in thin leather that has molded to the shape of your grip. The secateurs are better suited to these slender branches, giving you finer control and a lighter cut that the young trees prefer. You open your palm and let the spring push the handles apart, then close them again with a gentle squeeze, testing the action. The pivot is oiled and silent, the blades sharpened only yesterday, and they meet with a crisp, clean kiss. You kneel beside the first cypress, the gravel here coarser than on the alley, and mixed with crushed shells that glint pale in the sun, and begin your inspection. This first tree on the lower path is a neat pyramid of soft green, perhaps 12 feet tall, its lowest branches brushing the ground in a full skirt. You push the outer foliage aside gently with one hand and peer into the interior, where the light falls in thin, green-filtered streaks. The inner space of a young cypress is a quiet, sheltered place, its air still and slightly cooler, smelling of clean resin and the faint mushroom scent of the soil beneath the gravel. You look for the dead twigs that inevitably collect inside, small brown branchlets that have been shaded out by the outer growth and dried to brittle sticks. Your fingers find one almost immediately, a thin forked twig no longer than your hand, its needles curled into grey-brown scrolls. You work the secateurs in carefully, maneuvering the narrow blades past healthy green shoots, and snip the dead twig at its base where it joins a larger branch. It separates with a dry, papery crackle, a sound more delicate than the green snap of living wood, and comes away in your grasp. You withdraw it and drop it onto the gravel beside your knee, where it lies like a small, desiccated skeleton. You find 2 more dead twigs on the same tree, one high inside the crown and one tucked low near the trunk, both removed with the same careful reach and crisp snip. The secateurs open and close in your hand with a steady rhythm, the spring pressing back against your palm each time you release. After the dead material is cleared, you circle the tree slowly, examining its outer silhouette against the glare of the sky. A single young shoot has thrust out sideways near the top, breaking the symmetrical taper. You reach up, the secateurs extended, and clip it flush with the surrounding foliage, the green tip falling and catching momentarily on a lower branch before sliding to the ground. Satisfied, you move on along the path. The second cypress stands close to the nearest fish pond, its roots drinking from the perpetually moist soil beneath the gravel. It has responded by pushing out an abundance of soft, pale growth on its water-facing side, a lush spray of new needles that makes the tree look slightly lopsided. You spend several minutes here, working methodically around the pond side, removing perhaps a dozen fine shoots, each one a lighter, more delicate green than the older foliage. The secateurs make a soft, crisp sound each time the blades close and the cut needles release their sharp scent, faintly different from the alley cypresses, greener and less dusty. A gypsum, white butterfly, small and fluttering with an irregular bobbing flight, drifts past your shoulder and settles on the lavender hedge that edges the path. You pause to watch it for a moment, the tiny wings opening and closing with a slow, papery beat, before returning to the tree. As you work along the pond path, the water organ's madrigal reaches down from the upper terrace and spreads across the lower gardens, its notes softened by distance into a gentle, rounded music that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. The bass pipe is less pronounced here, a low, warm presence felt more than heard, while the flute pipes sound with a clarity that carries across the still air of the ponds. Each cycle of the melody rises and falls in its unchanging pattern, and between phrases there is the constant, softer sound of the water itself, the plash of the fountains, and the quiet lapping of the fish ponds against their stone edges. Occasionally, a fish breaks the surface with a tiny liquid pop and leaves a ring of ripples that expands slowly and disappears. The third cypress on this side of the path needs almost no attention, its shape naturally compact and its interior clear of dead wood. You still give it the full inspection, walking around its base, peering into its depths, but you find only a single needle that has yellowed and curled halfway along its length. You pluck it with your fingers rather than the secateurs, feeling the dry, rough texture before dropping it. Then you cross the gravel to the far side of the ponds, where a matching row of young cypresses lines the path that leads toward the fountain of the owl. The crossing takes only a few seconds, but in that brief stretch of open ground, the sun presses against the top of your head with renewed intensity, reminding you that the day is still climbing toward its hottest hour. The fountain of the owl is still some distance ahead, a small grotto tucked into the hillside, its name coming from the bronze birds that once perched in its niche and sang a watery song when the mechanism was activated, though now they are silent and the fountain runs with a simple, unadorned trickle. The path to it is flanked by more of the young cypresses, and you begin again with the first tree on the right, settling back into the pruning rhythm. The secateurs open close. Your hand cups the cut twigs and drops them. Your eyes move across the dense green surface in a slow scanning pattern. You find a small spiderweb stretched between two inner twigs, the spider a brown speck, motionless at its center, and you carefully work around it, leaving the web intact because the spider is a friend to the garden, catching the tiny flies that might otherwise settle on the fountain's marble lips. The fourth cypress on this row has a thicker interior, shaded so deeply that the light barely penetrates. Here you find a cluster of dead twigs, perhaps 5 or 6, all tangled together near the trunk. You clear them one by one, the secateurs snipping each at its base, the dry, hollow sound varying slightly depending on the thickness of the wood. The dead material accumulates in your hand until your palm is full, and then you carry it to the small heap you have started near the stone bench. You make a mental note to gather all the clippings before you leave the lower gardens, though the mental note is gentle and carries no urgency. By now the heat has risen to a level that makes the air above the gravel shimmer in slow, transparent waves, and the linen of your tunic is damp across your back. You kneel at the next tree, feeling the warmth of the gravel through the fabric at your knees, and methodically inspect the lower skirt of foliage. A few of the lowest branches have begun to touch the ground too heavily, their tips curling against the stones. You trim them back by an inch or two, angling the cut so that the shortened branch will lift naturally as it dries. The secateurs work with the same patient, steady motion, your hand strong but relaxed, and you find that your mind has drifted into the quiet, wordless state that this repetitive work nearly always brings. Thought becomes not a sequence, but a soft, open awareness of everything at once. The warmth, the drone of insects, the distant organ melody, the feel of the leather-wrapped handles in your palm. You move along the path toward the fountain of the owl, the cypresses giving way briefly to a small clearing where the grotto's dark mouth opens in the hillside. The fountain trickles from a carved shell into a shallow basin, the water so clear it is almost invisible except for the concentric ripples it makes. You pause here, not because the fountain requires attention, but because the shade of the grotto offers a brief respite. You stand just inside the arched entrance, the air several degrees cooler and smelling of damp travertine and fern. A small green lizard, dappled with black spots, freezes on the wall beside your elbow, and then skitters away into a crack. You rest the secateurs on a stone ledge and rub your palms together brushing off the tiny fragments of cypress bark and needle that cling to your skin. Through the grotto's opening, the lower gardens stretch back in a neat composition of green and stone and water, the fish ponds glinting, the cypresses standing in their orderly rows, and above them the pale mass of the villa rising in the haze. The organ madrigal sounds again, distant and steady, a thread of music woven through the thick summer air. After a few minutes, you leave the grotto and retrace your steps along the path, returning to the remaining cypresses you have not yet pruned. These trees, closer to the central ramp, have grown a little taller than the ones near the owl fountain, and their upper reaches require you to stretch or, in one case, to stand on the low stone wall that borders the pond. You do so carefully, feeling the warmth of the stone through your shoes, and extend the secateurs to reach a wayward shoot near the top of a tree. The shoot separates with a soft snap and tumbles down through the branches to land on the water's surface, where it floats for a moment, a tiny green raft, before a fish nudges it from below and it drifts toward the pond's rim. The pruning on these lower trees is indeed lighter than the work on the alley, but it requires the same patience and the same unhurried attention. Each tree receives your full gaze as you walk around its base, your hand moving the secateurs into every small pocket of shadow, finding the inevitable dead twig or stray shoot. The white butterfly, or perhaps its twin, bobs past again, its flight path looping and aimless over the lavender. The lavender's grey-green foliage gives off a dusty, herbal scent as your movements brush against it, mingling with the cypress resin and the clean smell of the pond water. You've now worked your way back to the ramp, and you estimate that only a handful of trees remain on the far side of the ponds, near the small rotunda of cypresses that gives that corner of the garden its name. You cross the gravel once more, the sun at your back now warming your shoulders and neck. The rotunda is a small circular clearing, ringed by ancient cypresses, far older than the younger ones you have been pruning. These are contemporaries of the alley trees, massive and dark, their interior spaces hollowed out by time into cool, shadowy chambers. You do not prune these ancient trees today because they are the domain of a different season, their growth now minimal and slow, but you walk among them on your way to the last of the younger cypresses grouped near the drinking fountain. The lion mask fountain here is a twin of the one on the upper terrace, water pouring from a bronze mouth into a pale stone basin. You pause, suddenly aware of your thirst, and hook the secateurs onto your belt before stepping to the fountain. The water spills in a thin, constant stream, and you cup your hands beneath it, collecting the cool liquid. It tastes exactly as you expected, faintly of the mountain limestone through which it has traveled from the Arniana River. A clean, mineral freshness that washes the dust from your throat. You drink slowly. One handful, then a second, and finally splash a little water on your face, feeling it trickle down your temples and along the line of your jaw. The coolness lasts only a moment before the heat reclaims your skin, but the relief is deep and satisfying. You walk from the fountain to the last grouping of young cypresses, 3 trees planted in a small triangle near the rotunda's edge. These receive the same careful attention as all the others. A slow walk around each trunk, a gentle parting of the outer foliage, the secateurs reaching in to remove the dry, curled twigs that litter the interior. The dead wood snaps with that same papery sound, and each twig joins the others in the small heaps you have made. On the final tree you find a bird's nest, small and cup-shaped, woven of dry grass and horsehair, tucked securely into a fork near the trunk. It is old and empty, its builders long gone, but you leave it in place, working the secateurs around it with extra care, so as not to disturb the delicate structure. By the time you finish the last cypress, the sun is approaching its zenith, and the shadows have grown so short they are barely visible. The heat now feels less like a presence than like the very substance of the air, something you move through rather than breathe. You gather the small secateurs, wiping the blades with a corner of your tunic to remove the sap and dust, and then walk back along the path to the stone bench where you left the long shears. You retrieve them and carry both tools up the sloping ramp, the climb warmer and slower than the descent, your legs moving with a pleasant, tired heaviness. The organ madrigal grows louder as you ascend, the bass note resolving into its full, round voice, and by the time you reach the central alley, the melody is once again clear and near, filling the upper garden with its soft, mechanical song. You place the long shears in the tool shed, hanging them from their iron hook, and set the secateurs on the wooden shelf next to the oil jar and the horsehair brush. The shed is warm and smells of linseed and dry wood, and you linger there a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness before stepping back out into the glare. The cypresses of the alley stand just as you left them, their trim surfaces catching the white sunlight along every tiny scale-like leaf. The garden is still, the water organ plays, and the morning's work on the lower terraces is complete, for now, though you will return later to sweep the pods and gather the clippings into their neat, compost-bound bundles. When the sun stands directly overhead and the whole garden seems to hold its breath, you retreat to the shade of the lower loggia, the one that overlooks the Vallone. The morning's work in the cypress alley and among the younger trees of the lower terraces has left your limbs with a pleasant, weighted tiredness, and the heat has climbed to an intensity that presses against the skin like a warm, heavy cloth. You walk slowly along the gravel path from the tool shed, the long shears now hung in their place, and the secateurs wiped clean and resting on their shelf, and you carry only the leather gourd of water that you refilled at the Lion Mask Fountain. The loggia waits ahead, its broad arches open to the deep valley below, and as you step from the blazing gravel onto the cool stone flags of its floor, the change is so immediate and so welcome that you pause for a moment just inside the shadow's edge. The loggia is a long, open gallery, its ceiling of wooden beams and terracotta tiles supported by a row of travertine columns that face outward toward the Vallone and the distant Sabine hills beyond. The stone floor has been worn smooth by generations of feet, its surface a pale, creamy grey that stays remarkably cool even on the hottest days, because the thick walls and high ceiling hold the night's freshness well into the afternoon. A low stone bench runs along the back wall, its seat polished to a soft sheen, and it is here that you settle yourself, placing the water gourd on the floor beside your feet and leaning your shoulders against the plastered wall. The plaster is cool through the thin linen of your tunic, a gentle, steady coolness that spreads across your upper back, and you let out a long, slow breath that you did not realize you had been holding. From the bench, you can see the entire sweep of the valley below, a vast bowl of olive groves and dry pasture, and the occasional dark spike of a wild cypress, all shimmering in the midday haze. The Sabine hills rise in the distance, their flanks a patchwork of pale grey rock and grey-green scrub, and above them the sky has bleached to a whitish blue, the colour of old glazed pottery. Nothing moves in the landscape, except the transparent trembling of heat rising from the valley floor, a slow liquid shimmer that makes the distant umbrella pines appear to dissolve very slightly at their edges and then reform as the air shifts. It is a view you have seen thousands of times, in every season and every light, and it never changes in its essence, only in its texture. Today the texture is of deep, suspended stillness, a noon that seems to stretch outward and hold everything motionless. You reach down for the water gourd, uncorking it with a twist of your thumb, and drink slowly. The water is no longer cool, having absorbed the warmth of the air during the morning, but it is wet and clean and it soothes your throat. You drink only a small amount, enough to refresh, and then recork the gourd and set it down again. Beside you on the bench rests the small linen bundle you collected from the kitchen garden on your way down, a piece of coarse bread and a wedge of pecorino cheese wrapped in a clean cloth. You unwrap it now, the cloth falling open across your knee, and break the bread into a few rough pieces. The bread is the same bread you eat every day, made from wheat grown on the villa's own lands and baked in the great stone oven behind the kitchens. Its crust is thick and faintly smoky, its crumb dense and slightly sour. The pecorino is firm and pale, with a sharp, salty tang that fills your mouth and makes the bread taste sweeter by contrast. You eat slowly, without hurry, chewing each mouthful many times and pausing between bites to rest your hands on your knees and look out at the valley. The only movement in front of you is that slow, liquid shimmer over the travertine paving at the loggia's edge, where the sun falls in a sharp, bright rectangle of white light. The heat makes the air waver in transparent ribbons, and if you watch long enough you can see the exact line where the shadow ends and the glare begins, a line that shifts by imperceptible degrees as the sun continues its slow arc. A single small lizard, grey and dust-coloured, darts across the sunny flagstones and vanishes into a crack between the stones. its movement so quick it seems like a flicker of the heat itself. Otherwise, nothing stirs. The water organ continues to play its madrigal on the upper terrace above and behind you, and from the loggia the sound is slightly different than it is on the alley. Here the notes are reflected off the valley wall and returned with a soft, hollow echo, so that each phrase of the melody arrives twice, first directly, then a moment later from the distance, the echo slightly fainter and slightly rounder. The bass pipe sounds its low foundational note, and then a heartbeat later, the echo of that note answers from the hills, a deep, ghostly hum that blends into the next phrase before it has fully faded. The flute pipes follow, their brighter tones ringing out and repeating in that same doubled pattern, so that the whole madrigal seems to be playing in a gentle, echoing conversation with itself. You have heard this effect so often that you no longer notice it as unusual. It is simply the voice of the garden at midday, as constant and as natural as the cicadas. The cicadas themselves have reached the peak of their daily chorus, a high, metallic drone that fills the entire valley. It is a sound so continuous that after a while you stop hearing it as a distinct noise. It becomes instead a kind of auditory heat, a shimmering in the ears that matches the shimmering in the air. Occasionally, one cicada, closer than the others, will buzz with a slightly different pitch, a thin, urgent rattle that cuts through the general drone and then subsides back into it. And each time this happens, your attention flickers briefly toward the sound before settling again into the general stillness. You finish the bread and cheese slowly, wiping your fingers on the cloth and refolding it into a neat square. The food has left a pleasant fullness in your stomach, and combined with the cool of the loggia and the heavy midday stillness, it brings a gentle drowsiness that you do not resist. You let your head rest back against the plaster wall, feeling its cool, smooth surface against the back of your skull, and you close your eyes. The darkness behind your eyelids is not complete. The bright sunlight filters through, creating a warm, reddish glow, and the shapes of the loggia's arches remain faintly visible as darker rectangles. You do not sleep, not fully, but you drift into a state that is halfway between waking and rest, a quiet suspension in which thoughts come and go with the weightlessness of the single small cloud that has appeared above the eastern hills, the only cloud in the entire sky. In this drifting state, you are still aware of the garden sounds, but they seem to come from farther away, as if you are hearing them through a layer of still water. The organ madrigal repeats its cycle, the bass note rising and falling, the flute pipe singing their brief familiar phrase, the near-silent click of the brass cylinder resetting. You know the melody so well that you can follow it without attention, each note arriving exactly where you expect it, the space between phrases as familiar as the notes themselves. Beneath it, the fountains continue their endless rush, and beneath that the cicadas drone, and beneath all of it, the deep, silent weight of the midday heat presses down on the valley and the villa and the loggia and your own resting body. Time passes without measure. The shadow at the edge of the loggia has crept a little farther onto the stone flags, the sun's movement imperceptible in the moment, but visible over the span of minutes. When you open your eyes again, the quality of the light has shifted very slightly, the white glare of noon just beginning to soften at its edges, though the heat has not diminished. You sit up a little straighter, rolling your shoulders to ease the stiffness that has settled there, and take another small drink from the water gourd. The water is now fully warm, tasting of the leather and of the faint mineral trace of the fountain, but it still refreshes. You let your gaze travel across the valley once more, picking out the familiar landmarks that you have known since you first came to the Villa d'Este. There is the ancient stone bridge over the Ornate, visible as a pale arch spanning a thread of silver water far below. There is the small white speck of the Hermitage Chapel on the facing hill, its walls catching the sun so that they seem to glow against the darker scrub. There is the line of the old Roman road, a faint, straight scar running across the valley floor where the paving stones still lie beneath centuries of dust. All of it is as still as a painting, fixed under the noon sun, and you look at it with the quiet, undemanding gaze of long familiarity. The organ madrigal sounds again, the bass note rolling out across the valley and returning as that soft, ghostly echo. You notice each time the slight breath of the bass pipe, the brighter sound of the smaller flutes, and the hush between phrases filled only by the plashing of the constant fountains. The melody is perhaps 20 seconds long from its first note to its reset, and it has been playing without variation for hours, for years, for as long as the water has flowed from the Rioscuro spring. You sometimes think that if you were to leave the villa and never return, this melody would still be playing, the brass cylinder turning, the water wheel groaning softly in its stone pit, the pipes speaking their 7 notes to an empty garden. The thought is not sad. It is simply a recognition of something larger and more enduring than your own presence, a comfort rather than a sorrow. A pair of swifts appears high above the valley, black crescents wheeling and diving against the bleached sky. They are the first moving things you have seen in the larger landscape, and you watch their flight with a lazy attention, following the arcs they trace. The swifts never land, spending their whole lives on the wing, and they move with a speed and precision that seems effortless, slicing through the thick air as if it offered no resistance. They circle once, twice, and then veer off toward the north and vanish beyond the ridge. The sky is empty again, the single small cloud having dissolved into nothing. You shift in the stone bench, drawing one foot up so that you can rest your arm on your raised knee. The linen of your tunic has dried where it was damp, leaving faint pale lines of salt at the seams. Your hands rest loosely in your lap, the palms upturned, the fingers slightly curled. They are the hands of a gardener, the skin brown and weathered, the nails short and rimmed with the faint dark crescents of soil and sap that never entirely wash away. There is a small callus at the base of your thumb from the repeated pressure at the shears, and a thin white scar across the knuckle of your index finger where you cut yourself years ago on a sharp edge of travertine. You look at your hands without really seeing them, your mind still adrift in the noon stillness. The heat inside the loggia has risen slightly, the stone walls slowly surrendering the coolness they stored during the night. It is still far more comfortable here than in the direct sun, but you can feel the day pressing in, a gentle insistence at the edges of the shade. You know that you will need to rise soon, to return to the upper terrace and check the water organ more thoroughly, to sweep the clippings from the alley, to make the afternoon round of the fountains. But for now, the stillness holds you, and you let it. There is no urgency in the garden. The cypresses continue their slow, invisible growth. The water continues its endless circuit from the hills to the fountains and back to the earth, and the brass cylinder continues its rotation, one cog after another, one note after another, in a rhythm that will outlast the hottest hour and the longest day. You close your eyes once more, not to sleep, but simply to rest them from the glare. The reddish darkness returns, and with it the amplified sounds of the garden, the organ, the fountains, the cicadas, and now a new sound, the very distant bleating of a goat from somewhere on the lower slopes, a thin, reedy cry that rises and falls and then stops. You let the sounds wash over you without naming them, without thinking about them, and for a long while you simply exist in the still, warm center of the day, a small part of the great, slow machinery of the Villa d'Este, as quiet and as patient as the stones themselves. The midday stillness loosens its hold gradually, the sun shifting just enough to send the first slant of afternoon light across the organ terrace at a slightly lower angle. You rise from the stone bench in the loggia, your limbs slow and heavy with the residue of rest, and gather the water gored in the folded cloth. The valley below still shimmers in the heat, but the quality of the light has changed, the white glare of noon softening toward a warmer, honeyed tone. You walk back along the gravel path and climbed the stone staircase to the upper terrace, the same worn steps you ascended in the morning, and as you rise the sound of the water organ grows from a distant echoing murmur into its full, clear voice. The madrigal is still playing, the cylinder still turning, the notes still following their unchanging sequence. On the terrace, the sun illuminates the organ facade with a golden light that picks out every carved detail, the furrowed brows of the satyr masks, the delicate fingers of the marble nymphs, the acanthus leaves curling around the base of the columns. The fountain's water spills from the upper basins and cascades over the shells, with a steady, glassy rush, the droplets catching the afternoon sun and scattering brief, tiny rainbows. You pause to look at the facade for a moment, your eyes moving over the familiar carvings, and then you walk around to the rear of the nymphaeum and open the small wooden door. Inside, the chamber is still cool, still dim, the copper tank still half full, and the brass cylinder still rotating slowly on its oiled axle. You retrieve the linen rag and the horsehair brush from their ledge, and you also take a small earthenware pot of olive oil, the same one you used earlier, tucking it into the crook of your arm. These are the tools of the afternoon cleaning, a task you perform every day at this hour when the light is bright enough to see the fine dust that settles on the pipes overnight. You exit the rear chamber and walk back around to the front of the organ fountain, approaching the carved wooden panel that protects the keyboard and the lower tier of pipes. The panel is a work of carpentry in its own right. A screen of dark walnut intricately pierced with a pattern of scrolling vines and small birds, its surface waxed and polished by years of careful maintenance. It fits into a shallow recess in the stone facade, held in place by 4 simple iron turn buttons, one at each corner, which you now rotate one by one. The iron is warm under your fingers, and the turn buttons move smoothly, their threads greased with the same tallow you use on the door hinges. You lift the panel away from the recess, its weight manageable but solid, and you lean it carefully against the stone balustrade to your left, making sure it rests securely before you turn back to the exposed interior. The keyboard lies before you now, a row of 23 keys carved from boxwood and set into an oak frame. The keys are pale with age, their surfaces worn into shallow, comfortable depressions by the touch of many fingers across the decades. The natural keys have darkened slightly to the color of old honey, while the sharps are capped with thin slips of ebony, still black as night. Below the keyboard, the trackers descend in their orderly grid toward the windchest, and above it the lowest tier of lead pipes rises in a gently stepped rank, their open mouths forming a row of dark, perfect ovals. Higher up, behind the first tier, 2 more tiers of pipes stand in ascending order, the tallest pipes at the back, the shortest at the front, creating a shallow V-shape that mirrors the carved facade. You begin with the pipes, taking the horsehair brush in your right hand and the linen rag folded into a small square in your left. You approach the lowest tier first. These are the larger pipes, the ones that produce the deeper notes, their lead bodies broad and slightly wider at the mouth. Each pipe is a hollow cylinder with a rectangular opening at its upper end, the flue mouth, and a small, sharp lip of lead at the lower edge where the airstream splits to create the sound. You have cleaned these pipes so many times that your hands know exactly where to go, the movements as natural as the pruning you performed this morning. The brush sweeps gently across the mouth of the first pipe, lifting away a thin film of dust that has gathered since yesterday. The dust is almost invisible, a pale grey bloom that you see only when the brush disturbs it, and it floats briefly in the shaft of sunlight before settling onto the stone floor. You follow the brush with the linen rag, wiping the lip and the flue mouth with a single smooth stroke, the cloth coming away faintly grey. You move to the next pipe, then the next, working from left to right across the tier. Each pipe receives exactly the same attention. The brush to sweep away the dust, the rag to wipe the mouth clean, a brief pause to check that the pipe is still firmly seated in its hole in the wind chest. The lead is soft and slightly warm to the touch, having absorbed the heat of the afternoon, and you are always careful not to press too firmly, lest you bend the metal. Some of these pipes are more than a century old, cast and shaped by the hands of Luca Biaggi and his assistants in a workshop somewhere in Rome, and the lead has developed a dark, matte patina with age. On 2 of the larger pipes, the fingerprints of the original builder are still visible, pressed into the soft metal during the casting and never polished away. The marks are faint, a series of dark grey walls and ridges that catch the light differently than the surrounding patina, and you always move your cloth around them without rubbing them away, tracing their borders with a delicate, almost reverent care. You do not know what Biaggi looked like, whether he was old or young, patient or quick-tempered, but his fingerprints are here, as present as your own, and you preserve them as part of the organ's long, quiet life. The second tier of pipes is reached by stepping onto the low stone ledge that forms the base of the fountain basin, a narrow platform just wide enough for your feet. You climb up carefully, steadying yourself with one hand on the carved pilaster beside the keyboard, and then you are at eye level with the middle pipes. These are narrower and shorter than the first tier, their voices higher and sweeter, and their mouths are smaller ovals that require a lighter touch. The horsehair brush, slightly splayed from use, fits neatly across the opening of each one, and you work it back and forth in a motion as gentle as stroking a cat's ear. The dust here is even finer than on the larger pipes, a silky grey film that vanishes at the slightest touch of the bristles. You follow with the linen rag, wiping each lip clean, and then you use a corner of the rag to reach into the narrow gap between adjacent pipes where a thin line of dust has settled. The lead feels cooler here, shaded by the upper tier, and the patina is slightly lighter in tone, more silvery. On the third and highest tier, the pipes are the smallest of all, some no longer than your hand, and no wider than a reed. These are the pipes that produce the organ's bird-like chirp, the bright, quick notes that sound like a finch calling from the ilex branches. Their tiny mouths are delicate, and you set aside the horsehair brush for a smaller brush kept in the pouch at your belt, a fine camel hair tool used only for this purpose. You work with even greater care because the smallest pipes are the most susceptible to bending, their thin lead walls easily deformed by a careless touch. One by one you dust and wipe each little pipe, the brush moving in tiny, precise circles, the rag following with the lightest possible pressure. Between two of the highest pipes, you find a few crumbs of dried moss, grey, green, and brittle, that have blown in from the hillside during some past storm. You extract them carefully with the tip of the brush, collecting the fragments in your palm, and then you brush the space clean before moving on. The cleaning of all three tiers takes time, but it is time measured not by any clock, but by the steady cycle of the organ's madrigal. Each time the bass note sounds and the flue pipes follow, you have advanced perhaps 2 pipes farther along the row, a slow, unvarying progress. The notes are louder here, directly in front of the facade, and you feel the bass pipe's vibration in your chest as a soft, deep pressure, like the rumble of distant thunder. The flue pipes speak with a clarity that is almost voice-like, each note pure and rounded, and you sometimes hum along without realizing it, your throat forming the same 7 pitches that the cylinder commands. When all the pipes are clean, you step down from the stone ledge and turn your attention to the keyboard. The boxwood keys, though protected by the panel, still gather a fine dust that settles into the narrow gaps between them, and the perspiration of past hands has left a faint, cloudy residue on the naturals. You take the linen rag and dampen a corner of it very slightly with water from the drinking gourd, just enough to moisten it without dripping, and you wipe each key individually, working from the lowest note to the highest. The damp cloth removes the residue and leaves the boxwood with a soft, satiny gleam. The ebony sharps you polish with a dry corner of the rag, rubbing them in small circles until they glow with a deep, black luster. Between the keys, you use the thin edge of the horsehair brush to sweep out any accumulated dust, the bristles sliding easily into the narrow channels and emerging with a small puff of grey. Beneath the keyboard, the wooden trackers that connect the keys to the pallets are exposed, a row of slim oak dowels standing in their guide holes like soldiers at attention. These too gather dust, and you brush them one by one, running the horsehair bristles down their length from top to bottom. The trackers move very slightly under the brush, a tiny springy give that tells you they are still properly tensioned. You check a few of the leather-tipped ends where the trackers rest against the pallet levers, feeling the leather with your fingertip to ensure it has not dried or cracked. The leather is still supple, slightly oily to the touch, and you nod once, a small unconscious gesture of satisfaction. Now you turn to the brass cylinder, which you can access from the front through the opening above the keyboard. The cylinder is the same one you oiled from the rear this morning, but now you are looking at its face, the side that engages the trackers. The hundreds of tiny iron cogs and brass shims parade slowly past as the cylinder rotates, each one gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. You reach for the small earthenware pot of olive oil and dip the tip of your little finger into the golden liquid. Then you touch that oiled fingertip very lightly to the wooden pegs that serve as bearings for the cylinder's axle. The pegs are visible at each end of the axle. Dark oak set into the stone walls of the recess, and they absorb the oil with a soft, thirsty sigh. You turn the cylinder by hand, using the same hand-turn peg you used from the rear, and as it rotates you apply a thin smear of oil to the tracker's upper tips where they make contact with the cogs. This reduces friction and prevents the wooden ends from wearing down over time. The oil glistens briefly on the polished oak before sinking in. You continue turning the wheel slowly, your hand moving in a steady, patient rhythm, until the freshly oiled section of the axle rotates out of sight and a new, dry section lines up beneath the trackers. Then you stop, satisfied that the entire bearing surface has been treated. The cylinder continues to rotate under its own water-driven power as soon as you release the hand-turn peg, the cogs resuming their slow mechanical dance, each one lifting its tracker at the precise moment to open a pallet and sound a note. From your belt pouch you take a small square of clean linen, the same kind you used on the pipes, and you wipe away a small excess of oil that is beaded on the stone shelf beneath the cylinder. The shelf is otherwise clean, swept daily, and you run your palm across it to check for any stray grit. Finding none, you step back from the exposed mechanism and survey your work. The pipes gleam softly in the afternoon light, their cleaned mouths dark and perfect. The keyboard glows with its fresh polish, and the trackers stand straight and dustless in their holes. The whole mechanism, though ancient, looks cared for and calm, ready to play without interruption for the rest of the day and into the night. You lift the walnut panel from where it leans against the balustrade and fit it back into the recess, pressing it gently until it sits flush with the surrounding stone. The 4 iron turn buttons you rotate back into place one by one, their threads engaging with a soft, gritty feel and then tightening firmly. The carved screen now hides the keyboard and pipes once more, its birds and vines standing in dark relief against the bright marble of the facade, and the organ appears exactly as it did when you arrived, its inner workings invisible and its music seeming to emanate from the stone itself. You gather your cleaning tools, the horsehair brush and the linen rag and the oil pot, and carry them back around to the rear chamber. Inside, you return each item to its proper place on the ledge, the brush hanging from its hook, the rag folded beside it, the oil pot stoppered with its cork. You pause to listen to the mechanism, the water gurgling into the tank, the wheel groaning softly below, the cylinder rotating with its quiet, rhythmic click. All is in order. The water flows constant and patient from the castellum above, just as it has done since Cardinal Ippolito's engineers first dug the canal from the Rioscuro spring more than a century before your own time, and the organ will continue to play its madrigal for as long as the water flows. You think of the engineers, their names long forgotten, who surveyed the hillside and calculated the fall of the land and laid the lead pipes that would carry the water down to this exact spot. Their work endures in the cool, steady stream that fills the tank and turns the wheel, and your own work, the daily cleaning and oiling and dusting, is only a small temporary addition to that long, unbroken chain of care. You step out of the rear chamber, closing the wooden door behind you and latching it with a gentle push. The afternoon sun has moved a little farther across the terrace, the shadows of the ilex trees lengthening on the paving stones, and the air has taken on the heavy golden quality of late afternoon. The organ madrigal plays on, the 7-note phrase repeating and resetting, and you stand for a moment on the terrace, letting the sound wash over you. The pipes speak clearly now, their voices bright and clean after the cleaning, and you notice, perhaps for the first time today, the very faint breathy overtone that always accompanies the highest flue pipe, a soft shimmer at the upper edge of the note. It is a detail that no one else in the villa would ever perceive, but it is there, and you register it with a quiet, private awareness before turning to descend the stairs and continue the afternoon's work in the garden below. The afternoon has grown heavy, the sun slipping lower over the Sabina hills and casting long tapering shadows from the tall cypresses across the central walk. Shadows that stretch all the way to the retaining wall opposite and climb it in dark, distorted parallels. The heat has softened only slightly from its midday peak, but the light itself has changed, deepening into a rich golden color that makes the travertine glow and the water in the fountain sparkle with a warmer brilliance. You descend from the organ terrace with your cleaning tools put away and your hands free, stepping down the worn stone stairs at the same measured pace as always. The madrigal follows you down, the bass note rumbling softly and then giving way to the brighter flue pipes, and you feel the day's rhythm settling around you again after the focused quiet of the organ chamber. On the central alley, the evidence of your morning's work lies scattered across the gravel, small heaps of cypress clippings, some green and fresh, others already beginning to curl at their cut ends, a few dead twigs, and the pale brown fragments of abandoned wasp nests. The piles are neat, but temporary, and now is the time to gather them. You walk to the supply closet tucked behind the oleander hedge near the kitchen garden, a small stone-built room with a wooden door that scrapes the ground when it opens. Inside, the closet is cool and smells of dry grass, linseed oil, and the faint, sharp tang of the fennel stalk broom that hangs from 2 wooden pegs on the back wall. You lift the broom down, feeling the lightness of its bundled stalks in your hand, the stems bound tightly with leather thongs that have darkened and smoothed with age. The broom's sweeping edge is slightly splayed from long use, the individual stalks split into fine, flexible fibers that catch the smallest bits of gravel dust. You also take a large woven basket from the floor, a broad, shallow container of willow withies that you use for collecting garden debris, and you hook its handle over your forearm. The basket is light, its weave open enough to let air through, but tight enough to hold the smallest clippings. You carry both broom and basket back to the far end of the alley, near the grand staircase, where you began your pruning before dawn, and you set the basket down on the gravel with a soft, hollow thump. Sweeping begins. You start at the outer edge of the gravel path beside the first cypress, positioning the broom at a low angle so that the splayed fennel stalks fan out across the terracotta, colored stones. The motion is a steady drawing pull. You bring the broom toward your body, and the clippings roll and tumble ahead of it, gathering into a small mixed pile that grows with each stroke. The sound of the broom on the gravel is a dry, continuous rustle, a whisper of plant fiber against stone that merges with the cicada's drone and the distant splash of the fountains. You work with both hands, one near the top of the handle to guide, the other lower down to apply gentle pressure, and your body sways slightly with each stroke, a slow, rhythmic movement that is as calming as the pruning was earlier. The clippings behave differently depending on their size and freshness. The smallest green needles, the ones you trimmed in the morning, are light and springy, and they leap ahead of the broom in little jumps, scattering sideways if you push too fast. You adjust your stroke to a slower, more deliberate pace, and the needles roll obediently into the growing windrow. The heavier twigs, the ones as thick as a goose quill, drag more slowly across the gravel, leaving faint pale scratches on the stones, and you sometimes have to nudge them with the broom's edge to keep them moving. The dead, dry branchlets are the easiest to sweep, their brittle forms sliding smoothly over the stones with a papery, skittering noise, while the fragments of wasp nest crumble into smaller pieces with every pass, and eventually disappear into the pile as fine, grey dust. You work your way along the right-hand row of cypresses, sweeping from the base of each tree outward into the center of the path, drawing the clippings into a single continuous heap that snakes along the gravel like a low green hedge. Every few paces you stop, lean the broom against your hip, and use your free hand to pick out any larger stones or bits of travertine that have become mixed with the clippings, tossing them back onto the clean gravel. The stones are warm and smooth in your palm, some of them flecked with mica that catches the golden light. Then you resume sweeping, the broom's fennel stalks wearing a little smoother with each minute of work, the leather bindings creaking softly. When the right-hand side is cleared, you have before you a long, low windrow of green and brown debris, and you set the broom aside to begin gathering it into the willow basket. You kneel on the worn gravel, the heat seeping through the linen at your knees, and you scoop the clippings with both hands, lifting them in double handfuls and dropping them into the basket. The clippings are light and fluffy, full of air and resin, and they compress only slightly when you press them down with your palm. The fresh green shoots are cool and moist at their cut ends, the older clippings crisp and dry. The scent of cypress rises strongly as you disturb the pile, sharp and clean, and the tiny needles prick your palms with a pleasant, tingling sensation. You work steadily, handful after handful, until the basket is full to its rim, and the gravel where the windrow lay is once again clean and bare. You carry the full basket across the garden, past the loggia and the kitchen garden wall, to the compost heap that lies behind the stables, in a shaded corner against the hillside. The compost heap is a large, dark mound of grass clippings, kitchen peelings, fallen leaves, and cypress trimmings, its surface steaming very faintly in the afternoon heat, the interior working its slow, warm alchemy of decay. You upend the basket, shaking it gently until all the clippings tumble out onto the heap, and then you use the broom to sweep the last few clinging needles from the willow weave. For a moment you stand beside the heap, looking at the fresh green layer you have added, and then you turn back toward the alley to continue the work. The sweeping resumes on the left-hand side of the path, the same steady drawing motion, the same dry rustle of broom on stone. The shadows of the cypresses have lengthened even in the short time you were emptying the basket, now reaching well past the center of the path and beginning to climb the retaining wall in dark, wavering bands. The wall itself is old and covered in places with a thin crust of grey-green lichen, and the cypress shadows flutter slightly against it as the branches stir in the very faint breeze that has begun to move down from the hills. This breeze is barely perceptible, just enough to lift the finest dust from the gravel and carry the scent of warm stone and dry grass across the garden. You sweep the left-hand side fully, drawing the clippings into a second long windrow, and then you kneel again to gather them into the basket. The work is simple and repetitive, and your mind drifts easily, following the patterns of light and shadow on the gravel, the way the golden afternoon illuminates each tiny quartz grain, the distant figure of a kitchen maid crossing the upper terrace with a basket of herbs, her footsteps silent at this distance. The organ madrigal sounds again, and you notice, without noticing, that the bass pipe seems slightly stronger now, perhaps because the water tank is completely full and the pressure is at its peak for the day. The notes blend with the sweep of the broom into a single, continuous, texturous sound, a gentle, all-encompassing presence that asks nothing of you. By the time you have emptied the second basketful onto the compost heap and returned to the allée, the gravel on both sides is clean and bare, the terracotta stones raked into neat, even rows by the passage of the broom. You sweep a final time along the center of the path, gathering a few stray needles that escaped the first pass, and then you carry the broom and basket back to the supply closet. The broom you hang on its pegs, the basket you set on the floor beside the door, and you close the wooden door with a gentle push, hearing it scrape softly against the stone threshold. The sweeping complete, you return to where you stopped your pruning in the morning, near the midpoint of the alley, and collect the long-handled shears from the tool shed once more. The cypress grows imperceptibly but ceaselessly, even in the span of a single summer day, and the afternoon pass is always necessary to catch the tiny shoots that have pushed out since your second round at mid-morning. You begin at the first tree on the right, the one nearest the grand staircase, and you find it almost exactly as you left it, its silhouette clean against the golden sky. But almost is not entirely. A single fine shoot has sprung from a node on the south-facing side, no longer than your thumb and as thin as a sewing needle. You open the shears, close them, and the shoot drops to the clean gravel, landing with a tiny, soft sound. You look at the gravel where it fell, and you notice that it is the only clipping in sight, a small green mark on the immaculate terracotta. You continue along the alley. The shears open and close in their familiar rhythm, and you find only the smallest adjustments to make. A spray of 3 needles here, a single twig there, a tiny bulge of new growth on a north-facing branch that you trim back with 2 careful cuts. The work is far lighter than it was in the morning, more a final tidying than a full pruning, and you move from tree to tree at a slightly faster pace, though still unhurried, still attentive. The light has deepened further, now a rich honeyed amber that makes the cypress needles glow with an almost emerald intensity. The shadows are so long that they intersect and overlap, creating a lattice of dark and light on the gravel that shifts as the branches sway in the faint breeze. On the 11th cypress, the one that earlier had the cluster of 3 wayward shoots, you find that the cut ends have sealed over completely with a clear, hard resin that catches the sun like tiny glass beads. You touch one with the tip of your finger, feeling its smooth, hard surface, and then you move on. The 15th cypress, the one with the slight lean to the west, shows no new growth at all, and you give it only a brief approving glance before passing to the next. By the time you reach the far end of the alley near the oval fountain, the shears have taken only a few dozen small clippings in total, and these you gather by hand rather than with the broom, depositing them directly into the basket you retrieve from the closet. The left-hand row receives the same light attention, the shears finding only the barest scattering of new growth. The sun is now low enough that it shines almost horizontally through the alley, and each cypress casts a shadow that stretches far down the slope, a long dark finger pointing toward the lower gardens. The air has begun to soften, the oppressive weight of midday lifting, and a few more birds have emerged from their shaded hiding places to call tentatively in the pines. The cicadas continue their drone, but with slightly less intensity, their chorus no longer at its peak, though it will persist until dusk. At the final tree, the one near the grand staircase where you began your day in the grey dawn light, you find nothing at all to cut. The cypress stands perfectly, its trimmed face smooth and even, and you simply walk around it once, the shears idle in your hand, before turning back to face the alley. The whole length of it stretches before you in the golden light, the gravel clean and raked, the cypresses sharp and dark against the amber sky, the fountain water sparkling where the sun still catches it. The organ madrigal sounds again, the 7 notes rising and falling, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a task completed, though you know it is only completed for today, and that tomorrow you will do it all again. You carry the shears back to the tool shed, hanging them on their iron hook, and you pause for a moment in the shed's warm linseed-scented dimness. Your hands are tired but not sore, the muscles of your forearms carrying the dull, pleasant ache of a full day's work, and you rub your palms together slowly, brushing away the fine dust of bark and needle. When you step out again, the garden is bathed in the long golden light of late afternoon, and the first hint of evening is beginning to gather at the edges of the sky. The organ plays on, the water rushes, and you turn toward the lower gardens to begin your evening round of checking all the fountains, the next quiet task in the long, slow rhythm of the summer day. The light thickens to the color of dark honey as the sun drops lower behind the ridge of Monte Cotillo, its final rays filtering through the ilex branches and the tall cypress spires in long golden shafts that strike the gravel paths and the stone terraces. The air has softened considerably since the heavy press of midday, though it still holds the stored warmth of the Roman summer, radiating gently from every wall and paving stone. You have put the long shears away in the tool shed and hung the fennel broom on its peg, and now you stand at the top of the stone ramp that leads down to the lower gardens, pausing for a moment to let your eyes adjust to the deepening light and to feel the small, cool breeze that has begun to stir from the valley. This evening walk through the fountains is the last of your daily rounds, a quiet circuit that ensures every spout and basin will run smoothly through the night, and you begin it now, as you always do, without hurry, moving at the steady pace of long habit. You descend the ramp, your footsteps echoing softly off the retaining wall where the seepage still darkens the stone in a permanent grey stripe, and you turn left at the bottom toward the Fountain of the Dragons. This fountain sits at the lowest corner of the formal gardens, a grand composition of 4 carved dragons with open mouths and spread wings, their scaly bodies half emerged from a rocky base of rough travertine. The central jet rises from a platform ringed by the dragons, a solid column of water that pushes straight up into the motionless evening air, its top dissolving into a plume of white spray before falling back with a heavy, continuous splash into the wide carved basin. The sound here is deeper and louder than in the other parts of the garden, a low, percussive rush that you feel as much as here. You walk slowly around the basin, your hand resting lightly on the warm stone rim, and you watch the central jet to confirm it is rising straight and true, not wavering or sputtering. The column holds its shape perfectly, a pale, unbroken pillar in the amber light, and you see no sign of debris around the spout. A few fallen ilex leaves, dry and brown, float on the surface of the basin near the overflow channel, and you scoop them out with a single cupped hand, shaking the water from your fingers before dropping the leaves onto the gravel, where they will be swept up in the morning. From the Fountain of the Dragons, you climb back up a short flight of steps to the path that leads toward the oval fountain, passing beneath a pergola draped with old wisteria vines. The wisteria has long since finished blooming, and its leaves hang in tired, dusty clusters that stir very faintly in the evening breeze. The oval fountain opens before you as you emerge from the pergola, its wide cascade running smooth and glassy over the curved lip of a massive travertine basin. The water here does not jet or spray, but sheets evenly, a broad, transparent curtain that catches the last light and glows a warm gold before plunging into the lower pool. The sound is a soft, continuous hiss, gentler than the percussive splash of the dragons, more like a steady, patient whisper. You trace your fingers along the lip of the upper basin, feeling for any thin scum of pollen or dust that might have collected during the day. Your fingertips encounter only smooth, wet stone, and the cool, fast-rushing water. But near the far end, you detect a very slight roughness, a patch of dried mineral deposit no larger than your thumbnail. You scrape it away with a careful flick of your fingernail, and the water flows over that spot with renewed glassy smoothness. Satisfied, you wipe your hand on your tunic and continue along the path. The 100 fountains stretch ahead of you now, a long, straight walkway bordered by a low stone trough into which 100 small arched spouts pour their individual jets in a continuous, parallel row. The effect is of a watery arcade, each slender stream catching the evening light in a slightly different way, so that the whole length of the fountain seems to shimmer with 100 tiny moving prisms. You walk the length of the upper row first, your steps slow and even on the gravel, your eyes moving from one small arch to the next. Each jet is a clear, unbroken thread of water falling into the trough with a sound that blends with all the others into a single fluid chorus. Near the midpoint you notice that one of the jets has drifted slightly sideways, its arc pulling to the left so that it lands not in the center of the trough, but against its inner wall with a harder, splashing sound. You kneel on the gravel to look more closely and find a fragment of dry lichen, grey, green, and brittle, lodged in the narrow channel that feeds that particular spout. The lichen is probably blown down from the hillside during the afternoon breeze, and you flick it away with a gentle prod of your finger. Immediately the water straightens, resuming its proper vertical line, and the splashing softens into the same smooth, rounded note as its neighbors. You walk the lower row of the 100 fountains next, descending a few steps to where the second trough runs parallel to the first, set lower into the hillside. Here the light is dimmer, the retaining wall casting a long shadow, and the water sounds slightly different, its splashes echoing off the close stone in a more confined, intimate murmur. You check each arch as before, finding all the jets clear and straight. One of the small marble masks from which a jet emerges, a carved lion's face with a worn, gentle expression, has a tiny spider web anchored in the corner of its mouth. The web is empty, its builder absent, and it catches the light in a delicate silvery net. You leave it in place because it does not obstruct the water, and you continue along the row until you reach the far end where the trough empties into a narrow channel that feeds the fish ponds below. The water here runs shallow and quick over a bed of smooth pebbles, and you pause to watch it for a moment, the light rippling the surface into a ceaseless, shifting pattern. From the 100 fountains, you climb the lateral staircase that cuts up toward the upper terrace, the same worn travertine steps you have walked so many times. The organ madrigal has continued all this time, the 7-note phrase repeating and resetting, and as you ascend the sound grows stronger again, the bass pipe resuming its full, round presence. You reach the organ terrace and pause there, standing before the carved facade with its marble nymphs and satyrs, its acanthus leaves and scrolling vines, now all touched with the warm golden light of the lowering sun. The water that feeds the organ streams steadily from the lead channel into the copper tank inside the rear chamber, and you can hear the faint, constant gurgle of it through the stone. You walk around to the back and open the small wooden door, ducking under the lintel to check the water level. The tank is still half full, the brass float bobbing gently on the dark surface, and the inflow from the lead pipe matches the outflow to the fountain jets so closely that the level remains perfectly constant, a balance maintained by the engineer's careful calculations more than 100 years ago. The cylinder turns, the cogs engage their trackers, the pipes speak their notes, and you stand in the cool dimness for a long moment, simply watching and listening. Then you close the door, latch it, and step back out into the evening. The light has deepened another shade while you were inside, the gold now tinged with amber, and the first faint hints of violet gathering at the eastern edge of the sky. You continue your circuit along the upper terrace, past the fountain of the Bicchiaroni with its shell-shaped basins, its water flowing in a steady, musical chime that you've heard all day. The fountain is running perfectly, its upper shell overflowing into the lower one with an even, unbroken curtain, and you pause only to brush a fallen cypress needle from the rim before moving on. The gravel crunches under your shoes, the only sound that is not water, and you walk in the long shadow of the villa itself now, the great building casting a cool, dark rectangle across the terrace. You descend the grand staircase at the head of the alley, the same staircase where you began your pruning in the grey dawn light so many hours ago. The cypresses stand tall and dark on either side, their trimmed surfaces now deep green verging on black in the fading light, and the gravel between them is clean and empty, swept smooth by your afternoon work. You pause at the bottom of the stairs and look back along the allée, the double row of spires receding in perfect perspective toward the oval fountain and the valley beyond. The garden is quiet except for the sound of water and the soft, distant drone of the cicadas that have not yet given up their chorus. And the scene has the still, suspended quality of late evening, a moment that seems to hold its breath before the night descends. You turn aside from the alley and walk the short path to the Fountain of the Owl, the small grotto tucked into the hillside where you rested at midday. The grotto is dark now, its interior lost in shadow, and the water trickles from the carved shell into the shallow basin with a sound so soft it is almost inaudible. You kneel to check the basin's overflow, running your fingers along the channel to ensure no leaves or gravel have blocked it, and you find it clear. A small frog, no bigger than your thumb, sits motionless on the damp stone at the edge of the basin, its bronze-colored eyes reflecting the last light. You rise carefully so as not to startle it, and you leave the grotto to its quiet. The fish ponds lie ahead, their long rectangular basins reflecting the sky in a muted silvery grey that is lighter than the surrounding stone. You walk slowly along the rim of the first pond, looking down into the water. The fish, large golden carp with scales that gleam faintly in the dusk, move slowly near the bottom, their fins wafting with a drowsy, rhythmic motion. You check the inflow pipe where fresh water enters the pond from the Hundred Fountains channel, a gentle stream that creates a small circular current on the surface. A single water lily, its white petals furled into a tight cone for the night, drifts beside the inflow, and you nudge it aside with the tip of your finger so that it does not block the flow. The water is so clear that you can see every pebble on the bottom, every stem of the underwater plants, every slow, deliberate movement of the carp. The second pond is equally still, its surface like a sheet of polished pewter. A single long-legged insect skates across the water on delicate feet, its dimples spreading in tiny intersecting rings. You check the outflow channel at the far end, where the water spills over a small weir and runs down a stone-lined rill toward the lower fields. The channel is clear, the water running fast and clean, and you watch it for a moment as it disappears into the gathering dusk beneath the ilex trees. You cross now to the far side of the lower gardens, where the Fountain of Diana sits in a small circular clearing ringed by ancient cypresses. This fountain is older than the others, its marble figures softened by centuries of water and weather, the goddess herself standing in a shallow niche with a crescent moon on her brow and the small bronze stag at her feet. The water here does not jet or cascade, but wells up from a hidden source beneath the statue's base, filling the circular basin with a slow, silent rise that then spills over the rim in a thin, continuous sheet. The sound is barely a whisper, the gentlest of all the garden's water voices, and in the evening quiet it seems to fill the clearing with a deep, almost sacred calm. You walk around the basin, your hand brushing the cool marble rim, and you see that the water is perfectly clear, the bronze stag's hooves visible beneath the surface, green with patina, but still sharp in every detail. A single fallen cypress needle floats on the water near the rim, and you lift it out with a careful pinch of your fingers, letting the drops fall back into the basin before you cast the needle aside. The first bat of the evening flutters over the clearing as you straighten up, a small dark shape against the violet sky, its flight erratic and swift. It circles the cypresses once, twice, and then veers off toward the grotto of Diana, where it will hunt for insects through the night. You watch it go, its wings beating with a soft papery flutter that you feel rather than hear, and then you turn back toward the upper gardens. The circuit is nearly complete. You climb the ramp once more, your legs carrying the pleasant, tired weight of the day's full movement, and you pause at the top to check the large wall fountain near the kitchen garden, a simple, functional spout set into a stone niche where the household draws its water. The flow here is strong and steady, the water splashing into a deep square basin that never empties. You cup your hand under the stream and drink, the water cool and sweet, tasting of the long journey it has made from the Aniene River through the hillside channels to this exact spot. You drink a second handful, and then a third, and then you wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and continue. The last fountain on your round is the small drinking fountain near the Rotonda dei Cypressi, the lion mask where you drank at dawn and again at midday. The bronze mouth pours its constant slender stream into the pale stone basin, the sound a gentle liquid bell, note that seems particularly clear in the evening hush. You neither drink nor pause here, having already quenched your thirst, but you run your hand through the stream once, feeling the cool water slide over your knuckles, and you confirm with a glance that the basin is clean and the overflow clear. You stand now at the edge of the upper terrace, looking out over the whole Villa d'Este. Below you, the cypresses stand in their dark, ordered rows. The fish ponds reflect the last pale light of the sky, and the fountains send up their quiet, constant voices. The organ madrigal plays on, unchanged, the bass note rolling across the valley and returning as that soft, ghostly echo off the facing hills. The Sabine hills themselves have faded to a deep, purple-grey silhouette against the violet sky, and the first star, a single point of white light, has appeared above the eastern ridge. The air is still warm, still thick with the scent of cypress and water, and the dry, dusty smell of the hillside. But there is a coolness beginning at its edges, a promise of the night to come. You have checked every fountain, every spout and overflow, every basin and channel, and all of them are running as they should, their water clear and unblocked, their flow steady and true. The garden is in order, the mechanisms of water and stone and lead all functioning in their ancient, patient way. You stand for a minute longer, your hands resting on the warm stone of the balustrade, your eyes moving slowly across the scene you know so well, and then you turn and walk back toward the tool shed to begin putting the garden to rest for the night. The next quiet step in the long, gentle rhythm of the summer day. The sun finally drops behind the ridge of Monte Cotillo, and the garden sinks into a soft grey twilight that seems to rise from the ground rather than fall from the sky. Above the villa's roofline, the blue deepens to the colour of a mussel shell, dark but still luminous at the horizon, while the cypresses lose their green entirely and become tall black flames motionless against the violet east. The cicada chorus has subsided at last, the final few individuals trailing off into a weak, sputtering rattle that fades and does not return, and the garden soundscape shifts subtly. The water, always the water, seems louder now, its many voices no longer competing with the insect drone, each fountain speaking clearly in the gathering hush. You walk the gravel path back toward the tool shed, your footsteps crunching with a sound that seems larger than it did during the day, amplified by the stillness. The evening air carries the first true coolness of the day, a thin, clean freshness that slides down from the hills and mingles with the stored warmth radiating from the stone walls and the gravel. You move without hurry, your body heavy with the pleasant tiredness of a full day's work, your hands swinging loosely at your sides. The organ madrigal continues its cycle on the terrace above, the bass note rumbling softly and the flue pipes answering in their familiar sequence, and you know that shortly you will silence it for the night, but not quite yet. You reach the tool shed and push the wooden door fully open, letting the last grey light of dusk fall across the small, ordered space. The air inside is warm and still, smelling of linseed oil and dry grass and the faint rusty tang of iron. The long-handled shears hang on their iron hook where you placed them after the afternoon pruning, their blades now cool and still, carrying the faint, pale smears of cypress sap. You lift them down one more time, not to use them, but to clean them, and you carry them outside to the low stone workbench that stands beside the oleander hedge. The oleander's narrow leaves are dark and still, its pink blossoms closed for the night into tight, pale scrolls. You take a clean linen cloth from the shelf inside and a small clay bottle of linseed oil. The same bottle you have used for years, its surface stained with a dark, sticky patina that has dripped and dried in long amber streaks. Sitting on the low wooden stool beside the workbench, you lay the shears across your knees and examine the blades in the fading light. The sap has dried to a pale, crystalline crust along the cutting edge, and you scrape it away gently with your thumbnail, feeling it flake off in tiny, brittle chips. Then you uncork the oil bottle and pour a few drops onto the cloth, the oil releasing its nutty green scent as it soaks into the linen. You wipe the blades carefully, turning them over and over, the cloth sliding along the iron with a smooth, liquid sound. The oil removes the last traces of sap and forms a thin, protective film that glistens faintly as the light catches it. You pay special attention to the pivot pin, working the oil into the joint by opening and closing the handles several times, the iron moving with a silent, liquid ease. When the blades are clean and gleaming, you set the cloth aside and carry the shears back into the shed, hanging them on their hook with the same care you use every evening. The iron catches the last light from the door, a brief bright gleam, and then settles into shadow. Beside the shears, you hang the small secateurs after giving them the same treatment. A careful wipe of the blades, a drop of oil on the pivot, the leather-wrapped handles rubbed clean of sweat and dust. The secateurs fit neatly on their smaller hook, the blades closed and the spring at rest. You turn now to the other tools that have seen use during the day. The fennel stalk broom you take from its pegs and examine in the dim light, your fingers feeling along the leather thongs for any loosening. The thongs are tight, the stalk still firmly bound, and you hang it back with a gentle pat. The willow basket you shake out over the compost heap one last time, then set against the wall beside the door. The horsehair brush and the camel hair brush you clean by rubbing their bristles gently between your thumb and forefinger, loosening the pale dust that clings to them, and you return them to their places on the shelf. The earthenware oil pot you stopper tightly with its cork, ensuring no spill on the wooden shelf, and you set the linen rags in a small basket reserved for cloths that will be washed and dried in the morning sun. You step outside the shed and close the wooden door, pushing it until the latch clicks softly into place. The sky has deepened another shade, the blue now almost entirely gone from the west, replaced by a deep violet grey that is slowly being overtaken by blackness from the east. A few more stars have appeared above the Sabine hills, scattered points of white light that seem very distant and very still. The air is cooler now, enough that the skin of your forearms tightens slightly, and you pause for a moment to look up at the emerging stars before taking the path toward the organ terrace for the final task of the evening. You climb the stone staircase at a slower pace than you did during the day, your legs carrying the full weight of the hours behind you. Each step is familiar under the worn soles of your shoes, the slight dip in the center of each stair, the coolness of the retaining wall under your guiding hand. As you reach the top, the organ facade looms before you, pale in the twilight, the carved nymphs and satyrs now mere suggestions of shapes, their features lost in shadow. The water still cascades over the marble shells, but the light has gone from the droplets. They are grey and silver now, moving in a constant, ghostly flow. The madrigal plays on, unchanged, the notes seeming louder in the evening quiet, each one hanging in the air a fraction longer before fading. You walk around the side of the nymphaeum, ducking under the ilex tree whose leaves brush your shoulder with a dry, papery whisper, and you open the small wooden door for the last time today. The chamber inside is now nearly dark, the round window showing only a dim grey disk of sky, and you must rely on touch and long familiarity rather than sight. You locate the brass lever set into the niche behind the nymphaeum, the lever that controls the wooden sluice gate, diverting water away from the organ cistern. It is cool and smooth under your palm, worn to a soft polish by countless evenings just like this one. You grip the wooden ball at its end and push it slowly across its slot, the metal sliding with a gentle, gritty resistance until it reaches the closed position. Immediately, through the stone floor, you feel the water wheel's rotation slow, the low groaning of wet oak and iron, deepening and then ceasing altogether as the flow to the cistern stops and the remaining water drains away. The brass cylinder completes one more partial rotation under its dying momentum, and then halts, its cogs frozen in mid-sequence, the trackers resting motionless against them. The madrigal falls silent mid-phrase, the final note of the flue pipe dying away into the stone and leaving behind a stillness so complete that you can hear the soft, separate drip of water from the tank's upper rim into the terracotta dish below. The sound of the fountains outside seems suddenly clearer, the major waterways that run always through every hour of darkness, now unchallenged by the organ's melody. You stand for a long moment in the silent chamber, your hand still resting on the lever, your breathing slow and even. The copper tank gleams faintly in the dimness, its surface catching the last faint light from the round window. The water inside is still as dark glass. You withdraw your hand from the lever and feel your way back to the door, your fingertips brushing the cool stone wall as you go. At the doorway you pause and look back into the chamber, though there is almost nothing to see. The organ waits in the darkness, its pipes standing in their silent ranks, its cylinder motionless, its tank slowly settling as the water finds its final level for the night. Everything is as it should be. You step out and close the door firmly, hearing the latch engage, and you walk back around to the front of the fountain. The facade is quiet now, the water still spilling over the carved marble, but the music absent, the pipes hidden behind their walnut screen giving no voice. You stand before the organ for a moment, looking at the darkened shapes of the nymphs and the faint, pale gleam of the water, and you feel the deep, quiet stillness of the garden settling around you like a blanket. Without the madrigal, the other sounds of the villa emerge more fully, the gentle, ceaseless rush of the major fountains, the distant splash of the dragons at the lower end of the garden, the soft whisper of the 100 fountains still playing their endless watery arpeggio, the very faint rustle of bats' wings as they begin to circle the terrace overhead. The air is soft and cool against your face, carrying the scent of damp stone and cut boxwood and the clean mineral breath of the fountains. You descend the staircase for the final time this evening, your hand trailing along the stone balustrade, and you turn not toward the alley, but toward the small workshop beside the oleander hedge, where the garden's smaller tools and supplies are kept. The workshop is a narrow room built against the kitchen garden wall, its single window facing east toward the hills, now a rectangle of pale grey in the dark stone. You push open the door and step inside, reaching for the tinderbox on its usual shelf. Your fingers find the small wooden box, the flint and steel inside it, and you strike a spark onto the charcloth with practiced, unhurried movements. The spark catches, a tiny orange glow that you nurture with a gentle breath until it becomes a flame, and you light the small clay oil lamp that sits on the workbench. The lamp's wick catches with a soft yellow flutter, and the workshop fills with a warm, unsteady light that pushes back the shadows. In the lamplight, you take the clay bottle of linseed oil from where you left it on the workbench outside, bringing it into the workshop and setting it on the shelf beside the other oils and salves. You take the small pot of tallow and check its lid, ensuring it is sealed against the night air. The collection of worn linen rags you gather into a bundle and set beside the door to be washed in the morning. Everything is returned to its proper place, every tool accounted for, every surface wiped clean. The workshop, like the shed, like the organ chamber, is in order, ready for the morning. You extinguish the oil lamp with a soft puff of breath, and the workshop returns to darkness. Outside, the garden is now fully settled into night, the sky above it a deep dark blue scattered with countless stars that were invisible during the blazing day. The cypresses stand as tall black flames, absolutely motionless against this starry background, their trim surfaces holding the moonlight that has not yet risen. The fountains gleam faintly where their water catches the star sheen, pale ribbons of moving silver in the darkness, and the sound of them fills the garden so completely that it becomes not a sound at all, but the very silence itself. You walk one last time along the edge of the central alley, your footsteps loud on the gravel, and you look down the long corridor of cypresses toward the valley. The Vallone is a vast, dark bowl beneath you, its olive groves and pastures invisible, only the faintest grey suggestion of the river far below catching any light at all. The Sabine hills are a solid black silhouette against the starry sky, and the air that rises from the valley is cool and smells of dry grass and wild thyme. You stand there for a little while, letting the night settle around you, feeling the deep, quiet presence of the garden that has been your charge through every hour of the long summer day. The Villa d'Este rests in the darkness, its loggias and staircases and fountains all still, though the water never ceases its flow. The great house itself shows only a few warm yellow points of candlelight in its upper windows, the cardinal's apartments distant and quiet. You turn from the valley and walk slowly across the gravel toward your own small room, the one with the unglazed window open to the kitchen garden. And as you walk, you feel the tiredness in your limbs transform into a deep, calm heaviness that seems to draw you gently toward rest. The day's work is complete, from the first cypress pruned in the grey dawn to the final lever pushed in the twilight, and the garden will keep itself through the night, the water flowing, the trees standing, the stone holding its warmth until the sun returns. You walk the now dark gravel paths back toward your room, the stones crunching with a sound that seems louder in the immense stillness of the sleeping villa. The stars are fully out now, a dense scattering of white points across the deep black vault, and the moon has not yet risen above the Sabine hills, so the garden lies in a soft, velvety darkness, broken only by the faint silvered gleam of water where the fountains catch the starsheen. Your body moves with the slow, heavy rhythm of the day's full work, your legs carrying the memory of every step, from the cypress alley to the lower terraces, your arms remembering the weight of the shears and the broom, your hands still holding the faint, pleasant ache of the many small movements they have made since dawn. The air has cooled considerably now, enough that you feel it on the skin of your forearms and the back of your neck, a thin, clean coolness that carries the scent of damp stone and cypress resin, and the distant, mineral breath of the Aniene River. You pass the kitchen garden wall, a low stone barrier over which the dark shapes of rosemary bushes and sage plants spill in tangled silhouettes. The herbs release their fragrance as you brush past, a dusty, aromatic cloud of camphor and thyme that mingles with the night air. A single cricket, the first of the evening, begins to chirp from somewhere deep in the boxwood hedging, its call a high rhythmic pulse that sounds like a tiny, distant bell. The cricket's note joins the constant rush of the fountains, adding a new thread to the garden's night voice, and you listen to it as you walk, your steps falling into an unconscious rhythm with its steady beat. Your room is built against the outer wall of the kitchen garden, a small whitewashed structure with a low roof of terracotta tiles and a single narrow window that faces east toward the hills. The window has no glass, only a wooden shutter that you leave open through the summer months to admit the cool night air, and a simple linen curtain that stirs faintly in the breeze as you approach. The door is a plank of aged chestnut, its surface smooth and dark with years of handling, and its iron latch lifts easily under your thumb with a soft, familiar click. You push the door open and step inside, the interior of the room even darker than the garden, though a faint grey light from the window outlines the shapes of your few belongings. The room is as it has always been, the iron bedstead with its straw mattress pushed against the far wall, the single wooden chair beside it, the small table beneath the window holding an earthenware jug and a tin basin. The rafters above are lost in shadow, but you know every beam and every knot in the wood, and the whitewash on the walls has the same faint, chalky smell it has held for years. You cross the room in the darkness, your feet finding the smooth, cool stones of the floor with the same familiarity they have found every night, and you set the water gourd and the folded linen cloth on the table beside the basin. You pour water from the earthenware jug into the tin basin, the sound a bright, liquid note in the small, quiet room. The water is cool from sitting in the shaded room all day, and it catches the faint grey light from the window in a pale, silvery disk. You dip your hands into the basin, cupping the water and lifting it to your face, and you wash slowly, the coolness spreading across your forehead and cheeks and along the line of your jaw. The water turns faintly grey as the fine dust of the garden, accumulated through all the hours of pruning and sweeping and walking, dissolves from your skin. You wash your hands next, rubbing the palms together with a slow circular motion, working the water into the creases and around the nails where the darker crescents of soil and sap have settled. The callus at the base of your thumb, the one shaped by the repeated pressure of the shears, feels smooth and hard under the water, and you rub it gently with your other thumb, a small absent gesture of care. You reach for the rough linen towel that hangs from a peg on the wall, and you dry your face and hands with slow, unhurried strokes, the fabric coarse against your clean skin. The water in the basin is now grey and still, and you leave it for the morning, stepping away from the table and toward the low bed. The straw mattress rustles softly as you sit on its edge, the sound dry and papery, and you bend to unlace your worn leather shoes. The laces have held all day in their simple loop, and they loosen easily, the leather warm and supple from the heat of your feet. You set the shoes side by side under the chair, their soles worn smooth and thin, and you pull off the linen tunic and trousers, folding them loosely over the back of the chair where they will air through the night. The air on your bare skin is cool but not cold, and it feels clean and light after the long hours of the day. You lie back on the mattress, feeling the straw shift and settle beneath your weight, molding itself to the shape of your shoulders and hips. The single rough blanket, woven from undyed wool, lies folded at the foot of the bed, and you draw it up over your body with a slow, gentle pull. The wool is light and airy, enough to take the edge from the night coolness without trapping the heat, and it smells faintly of lavender from the sprigs you tuck among the folds. You settle your head on the thin pillow, a sack of coarse linen stuffed with more clean straw, and you turn your face toward the open window. The narrow rectangle of night sky is visible through the unglazed opening, a strip of deep dark blue scattered with a few of the brighter stars, and the linen curtain stirs very faintly in the small breeze that slips through, its movement a pale, ghostly flutter in the darkness. Your body releases its last tensions into the mattress, the muscles of your back and legs loosening, the tiredness that has been present since late afternoon transforming now into a deep, calm heaviness that seems to press you gently into the straw. Your breathing slows without any conscious effort, each inhale drawing in the cool, herb-scented air, each exhale leaving your chest with a soft, soundless ease. You feel the steady beat of your heart, a quiet, patient rhythm that has accompanied you through every hour of the day, and you listen to it now as it gradually settles into the slower cadence of rest. Outside, the garden continues its night existence, the sounds of it reaching you through the open window with a clarity that the darkness seems to sharpen. There is the water, always water, the hidden rushing from 100 different channels that never cease their flow. The major fountains splash and murmur in their basins, their voices layered one upon another into a complex liquid harmony, the deep, percussive rush of the dragons at the lower end of the garden, the glassy whisper of the oval fountain's wide cascade, the gentle, musical chime of the Bicchierone's shell-shaped basins, the quiet trickle of the owl fountain in its shadowy grotto. Beneath these distinct voices runs the steady, softer sound of the 100 fountains, their parallel jets falling into the long stone trough with a noise like a distant, endless rainfall. And beneath even that is the low, constant gurgle of the channels and pipes that carry water from the hillside to every corner of the villa, a sound that is less heard than felt, a deep subterranean hum that seems to rise through the very stone. The organ is silent now, its brass cylinder motionless in the dark chamber behind the carved facade, its pipes standing in their patient ranks. The water still flows into the copper tank, because you did not shut off the supply entirely, only diverted it from the wheel, and you can imagine the tank slowly filling through the night, the level rising by imperceptible degrees, the brass float climbing with it until by dawn the cistern will be full again, and ready for the lever to be pushed back into its running position. The thought is a quiet one, a gentle, familiar awareness that asks nothing of you, and you let it drift through your mind without holding it. The cricket near the boxwood hedge continues its chirping, a steady, rhythmic pulse that seems to mark the passing of the seconds, though you are not counting them. The bat that you saw near the grotto of Diana flutters past the window, a brief, dark flicker against the stars, and then it is gone. A very faint breeze stirs the cypresses, and you hear the soft, dry whisper of their needles moving against one another, a sound like the distant turning of pages in a very old book. The breeze carries the cool, clean smell of the night hills, the dry grass and wild fennel, and the faint, sweet scents of the oleander blossoms that have opened again in the darkness. You close your eyes, and the reddish darkness behind your eyelids replaces the grey rectangle of the window. The sounds of the garden become more immediate in the absence of sight, each one distinct and clear in the stillness, and you let them wash over you one by one without naming them or thinking about them. The rush of water, the chirp of the cricket, the whisper of the cypresses, the soft creak of a wooden door somewhere in the villa, settling into its frame as the night coolness contracts the timber. The layer of these sounds is the silence, a deep, living silence that is not empty but full, a presence rather than an absence, and you sink into it slowly, like a stone sinking into still water. Your thoughts drift, as they always do before sleep, following the same quiet path they have followed every night of this long summer. You think of the cypresses standing in their dark rows on the alley, their trim surfaces neat and even, the cut ends you made at dawn now sealed with hard, clear resin. You think of the water organ waiting in its chamber, the brass cylinder still, the lead pipes clean and silent, the fingerprints of Luca Biaggi preserved in the soft metal like a message from another century. You think of the fountains running through the darkness, their water clear and unblocked, every spout you checked this evening still flowing true and steady. And you think of the morning, when you will rise in the grey light before dawn and begin again, The pruning, the sweeping, the checking of the mechanisms, the quiet, patient work that keeps the Villa d'Este alive. The thought is not a worry or an anticipation. It is simply a recognition of something that will be, a gentle, comforting certainty. The villa, the organ, the cypresses, and the water will all still be there unchanged in the morning, waiting for your hands. This thought repeats itself, soft and slow, as you drift deeper towards sleep, and each time it returns it is slightly fainter, slightly less distinct, its edges blurring into the general, peaceful darkness of your mind. The cricket's chirp seems to come from farther away now, the rush of the fountains a distant, dreamlike murmur, and the cool air from the window touches your face with a gentleness that feels almost like a blessing. You turn very slightly onto your side, the straw mattress rustling once, and then falling silent, and you draw the wool blanket a little higher onto your shoulder. Your hand rests loosely on the pillow near your cheek, the fingers curled with the same gentle, unconscious curve they held around the handles of the shears during the long morning. The callus at the base of your thumb presses faintly against the linen of the pillowcase, a small familiar roughness that is as much a part of you as your breathing. Your body feels weightless now, suspended between the mattress and the darkness, and the boundary between wakefulness and sleep has grown so thin that you could not say on which side you lie. The last conscious thought that passes through your mind is not a word, but an image. The cypress alley at dawn, the trees dark against the pale grey sky, the shears in your hand, the first tentative cicada beginning its rattle. The image holds for a moment, clear and still, and then it softens and dissolves into the general, warm darkness of sleep. Your breathing deepens, the steady rise and fall of your chest slowing into the rhythm of rest, and the sounds of the garden, the water, and the cricket and the whispering cypresses become part of a dream that you will not remember in the morning. The Villa d'Este rests around you in the deep summer night, its fountains flowing, its trees standing, its ancient stones holding the warmth of the day. The organ waits in its chamber, the shears hang on their hook in the shed, and the gardener, who has tended them all through the long hot hours, sleeps the deep quiet sleep of a day fully lived, a sleep as calm and as patient as the garden itself.